Oh, I don't think so. Indeed, yeah, this is a lame duck like myself. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our council and committee meetings this evening. I'd like to begin by thanking everybody for joining us tonight. It's a beautiful night out there. There's all kinds of activities that people could be up to this evening, and we really genuinely appreciate you coming to join us at our meetings this evening. So thanks everybody for being here. We're going to start off with the Finance and Environment Committee meeting. And as with all of our meetings this evening, there will be an opportunity for public participation. We encourage people to join us for public participation at the committee meeting or council meeting that your item of interest appears on the agenda for. If you're not sure which meeting that would be, feel free to come forward to any of the meetings and we can direct you to the appropriate meeting, and we welcome everybody for that. So, Finance and Environment Committee, do we have any additions or changes to the agenda? Moved by Councillor Kahakawila, seconded by Councillor Epp. All in favor? Opposed? That passes. We have no presentations for Finance and Environment Committee, so we have an opportunity now for public participation, specifically right now on items on the Finance and Environment Committee agenda. I would ask people to begin with their name and address and to confine themselves to 4 minutes for their public presentation so that we can hear from as many people as possible. All right, Bev?
Good evening, Bev Bacon, Metchosin resident. My letter is a pink, but I'd like to read it anyhow. Because I'd like the outgoing council to take an initial step on this so that
Now, sorry, Bev, before we get going, is this the pink related to the
to
CRD?
funding, yeah.
Yeah, that's going to come up under council.
Oh,
Can you present that at public participation for council?
I will do that.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much. So I'm seeing nobody else lining up at the microphone for public participation. We'll move on to adoption of minutes. Moved by Councillor Little, seconded by Councillor Kahakawila. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Those are adopted. No minutes to receive, no business arising. Brings us to item 7A, the Metchosin Climate Action Plan, which is on pages 7 and 8 of your agenda package. This is an item that was initiated with PINA Sustainability. The recommendation here, it's recommended 3 steps, and that an engagement session be held this September, which is described above, where the PINA staff would sit down with council and appropriate staff from the district prior to public meetings, and obtain input from council and staff. So I will make the motion that we schedule that meeting in September between council and staff and PINA Sustainability, and leave it to staff to find a date that will work for everybody. That's seconded by Councillor Little. Discussion. Mayor Rance.
Yeah, I kind of think that, I don't know, this might be better to have the new council talk to them prior to the, I mean, you have been pushing this, Councillor McKinnon, and I certainly respect that you should be speaking to it. But at the same time, a new council will have a mandate. And maybe we should have 2 meetings. One for us, where you get to express why you feel so strongly about this and what you would like to see it constructed as. And then a second one for the new council. So they can, if they have a different mandate, can reverse everything you said.
Yes, Councillor Kahakawila.
Actually, I was going to suggest the same thing, and for the same reasons. I think the context of what you've already brought to their discussions would be good to actually have that solidified, and then that information brought to the new council. It would provide context, and hopefully you'll still be around the district, so that, you know, if the new council has questions, they could always bring you in on a maybe an informational basis. But I do agree that this is something that the new council is going to have to address. But to lose the knowledge that you've already put into this, I wouldn't want to see. So it would be good to have that continuity between this current council and the next council.
So then you would be supporting, say, a meeting with this council and the next council, or?
I would say that we should look at getting a meeting together by the end of September. So probably between UBCM and end of September, and then bring a recommendation forward to the new council to have a subsequent meeting with PINA. Oh, okay. Can you hear me? Okay. So I would recommend that we have the meeting with us and PINA at the end of September, and then make a recommendation to the incoming council to have a subsequent meeting with the information from that meeting being brought forward sort of as an orientation for the new council and for them to move forward on a direction.
Councillor Little.
I somewhat disagree, because we did have a mandate this time. You've been talking about this for quite some time. We have a proposal from the consultant. I'd like to see a meeting in September, absolutely, Councillor Kahakawila. But realistically, it says here we're going to solicit community feedback and engagement. I don't see that there's enough time. Maybe there is, but I don't think there's enough time for the consultant to adequately address the community's concerns or questions. Although Miran says they will have a mandate, we do have a mandate now. We're not doing nothing between now and October 15th. So I'd like to move forward a little bit farther than that. That's what I'm thinking.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kahakawila?
Yeah, it's not about whether or not this mandate ends with this council or not. What I'm trying to do is, by having these two sets of meetings sort of preset, would be to make sure that we don't lose the institutional knowledge that Councillor McKinnon brings forward to this particular project that we've already started, and then that sort of springboards the next council into looking at it. I don't anticipate for a moment that the next council, whoever they are, aren't going to have to be dealing with climate action and the plan that we've already started. But I mean, that would be a decision that the next council makes, but we need to at least set up the next council for success, and to do that we need the information that we've already started to gather, and in particular with what Councillor McKinnon has already been working on with our planner and with PINA.
Yes, Councillor L.
Yeah, I agree with having a meeting for us and then a meeting for the new council, because we have already agreed to contract out this PINA to do this study and with all the surveys and so on they're going to do. So I just think, the more ideas the better, and the more consultation on just how we're going to address it. That gives them some ideas to come back to the new council with and to add to.
Yes,
Well,
Lisa.
just to add some comfort with this, Catherine, our planner, is working directly with Councillor McKinnon, and there'll also be some history and corporate memory there. She'll be leading the file into the next council as well.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor then that we arrange that meeting for the end of September with this council, with a recommendation that that opportunity be offered to the incoming council as well. And we, about of it, I think that came from, I think it came from Councillor Kahakawila, seconded by Councillor Little, I believe.
I think it was you, and then me, and then Councillor Kahakawila amended that, a friendly motion.
Right, okay. Yeah, that's so from me, amended by Councillor Kahakawila in a friendly motion, seconded by Councillor Little. All in favor? Opposed? And that passes. Thanks very much for that discussion. That's much better than the one I was proposing. The only other substantive item on our agenda this evening is our second quarterly financial report. These are items that used to just appear in councillors' folders and seem to be of interest to a broader range of people in the community, so we've begun to append them to these agendas, and I hope that the next council will continue the practice. So this is our quarterly financial report for our second quarter, accompanied for the first time by an excellent memo by Sulin Tarnowski. And the recommendation is simply that this be received for information.
Move receipt.
Moved by Councillor Kahakawila, seconded by Councillor Little. Any discussion on it? I think I would characterize it by simply saying that there are no big surprises in our second quarterly report, that it's generally on track for where we expected budget 2021 to be, or 2022 to be, 2021 to be at this point in the year, and so far so good. right, that is all the business on the agenda. I'll accept the motion for adjournment. Moved by Mayor Rand, seconded by Councillor Kahakawila. All in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Tina, we're good? Okay, so we'll start the planning committee meeting for today, August the 22nd. First item up is the addition of the supplemental, the pink. We have two. We have a supplemental package as well as the email from Sue Panton. So can I have a motion to amend the agenda with those two under correspondence?
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Little, seconded by Councillor McKinnon. Called to question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. To start off this evening, we do have a presentation from Sarah Anthony, and I think staff are going to assist.
Did I turn it off?
You may have. So a couple of things. I suspect most of you are here tonight for this presentation. I could be wrong, but just a few sort of housekeeping points. First of all, Sarah, I'm going to time you. You got 10 minutes. It will come up later on in the agenda for council to discuss and or make a decision on in whatever fashion that is. Public participation will happen after your presentation. I would remind people tonight that to be courteous and that some of the views that may or may not be expressed tonight you may or may not share them. However, this is a safe place for people to be able to express their opinions and obviously their concerns and their desires for our community. Sarah, take a deep breath. It's Metchosin. We're a friendly group here. I've read the overview of your presentation. It's well done. Take a moment, and the floor is yours.
Okay. I'm not a very good public speaker in the sense that I get super nervous, so I'm basically just reading it out. I will flip this over. So this is about amending bylaw 259 to include tiny homes and RVs as a secondary residence. So the struggle to find housing in Victoria and much of BC is nothing like I've ever seen in my lifetime. While Victoria has always been expensive, housing, one of the most basic human needs, is becoming more and more out of reach for far too many people. At one time, living in Victoria meant having a smaller house rather than a large one, living in an apartment instead of a house, renting a bachelor instead of a one-bedroom, maybe having a roommate instead of a studio. But now we're seeing more and more working people unable to keep a roof over their head. So why is this happening? Vacancy rates in Victoria have gone from 2.2% in 2020 to 1% and even 0.4% in the West Shore. This basically means there is nowhere to rent, and what there is available has become too expensive for the average worker. If you have a look on Facebook Marketplace, one bedrooms are ranging from $1,500 to $1,800, and two bedrooms from $1,800 to about $2,500, and actually much higher than that as well. And why is this? There's a lot of reasons. Some people blame Airbnbs, lack of public housing, private investors buying everything up. There's a lot of factors, but the reality is it is happening, and it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. Some have tried to come up with some alternatives to keep themselves housed, such as living in an RV or a tiny home, but that has its challenges as well. RV parks have become overloaded. The wait lists are now up to 2 years for places like Fort Victoria. RV parks are often fine to rent out to long-term tenants in the off-season, but in the summer they up the rates to get the tourists in, and this results in a lot of people trying to find parking for the summer months or permanently if they can't get a space after that busy season. I've talked to a shocking amount of people who have been reduced to parking in side streets, have to move every day so they won't get ticketed. And I want to stress that the people I talk to who are in this situation are not people with no income. There are a lot on fixed income, sure, people with pensions, people on disability, and there are a lot with full-time jobs. One member of the housing crisis group I'm involved in, he actually worked for the BC government when he found himself living in his vehicle, and he's actually right here, Richard. It's nice enough to come, thank you. And he has now purchased an RV, but he's been constantly ticketed because he can't find a place to park. I think recently you were able to get a place, so that's really great. It took a long time. So, you know, with all the tickets and everything, being homeless is not cheap at all. And then you imagine all the gas to have to move all the time and everything. It's really crazy. And I have talked to quite a lot of people like that. I actually should mention I've been admitting some housing crisis groups, and it's the stories I'm hearing from people. And these are people with jobs. They are not just like, I don't want to say just homeless people, because that sounds awful too. Everybody has their reasons that this is happening, but these are a lot of people who work in our community and they just can't get a place to live. Some of them have really good jobs. I'll get into that a bit later. Sorry, I get excited. So how is this affecting Metchosin? I think I might have a slide for that. So yeah, I'll get there. So with no other options, many of our workers are moving away. Not just our wait staff at our favorite restaurants or our grocery store clerks or our farm workers, but our tradespeople and even our doctors can't find houses. Last week I had a guy pull over his BMW at our farm stand, and we got talking. He was super stressed. He was a stonemason, and he was just in absolute panic because he wasn't going to be able to keep renting where he was renting, and he couldn't find anything. Nothing. He wasn't going to be able to stay, and I've heard we need stonemasons and tradespeople. So my sister-in-law is an RN, and she told me that a lot of her colleagues are thinking of leaving because it's just too expensive here and they can't find a place. I've seen several Facebook posts for doctors looking for places to rent, and as you remember, we actually had a guy in here representing the doctors who said that housing is a concern. So I have this actually took me a really long time to figure out how to do on PowerPoint, so I hope you appreciate it. So who is struggling with housing insecurity? Pensioners, low-income workers, people on disability, students, but also middle-income workers. They talk about the missing middle. Teachers are leaving, medical staff, including RNs, restaurant staff. A lot of restaurants are closing because of this. The ferries, I probably should have put that in there. They're having a really hard time keeping people. And doctors are having a hard time, and that should scare everybody. So what can Metchosin do? Obviously, you know, we can't solve this whole thing. That's not what we can do, but we can maybe help a little bit, maybe ease some pressure, which is why I would like to ask City Council to consider amending Bylaw 259 to include RVs and tiny homes as a secondary dwelling. So to be very clear, what we're saying is each property would be allowed to have one additional dwelling in the form of a tiny home or an RV or a detached or detached suite. You're not getting an attached suite and a tiny home or whatever. I think there was maybe a bit of confusion about that. So yeah, this would not mean that you could have all of those things. You could basically, in lieu of having an attached or detached suite, you could rent out a tiny home pad or an RV pad. Or, you know, I guess if you had your own for whatever reason, you could rent that out. So what is a tiny home? Oh, I just talked about that more.
Just as an FYI, you're about halfway through.
Okay, so that's what an RV looks like. I think everybody knows that. This is a family that I follow on YouTube, and they live in an RV, and they're very interesting. This is what a tiny home generally would look like. So what is it? It is defined as a small house under 500 square feet. Some are built on foundations, as you would a regular house or secondary suite, but many are built on a trailer frame and what is known as tiny home on wheels. Many of the tiny home manufacturers who build these build to CSA standards. So, and there is also something, so I put quite a few because I think they're really cool. That's the inside of a tiny home with a family in it, a bathroom that is amazing in a tiny home. And this is what is called a schoolie. So this is sort of an in-between. This is a school bus that's been converted, and these people had a very lovely dog. So who live in these places and why? So tiny home living is popular with mostly singles and couples, but some families also live in tiny homes or RVs with their children. They can be young or old. They can be working professionals or retired people. Most of them value sustainable living and want to have a low environmental impact. Most want to live in a rural setting. They're often minimalists and want to have a simple life. They want financial independence. While they may need to rent a pad, they feel like they can own their own home at least. So how does this benefit Metchosin? It provides a safe, affordable place for people to live who value the rural nature of Metchosin. additional income with low investment. Building a suite is a lot of money. Setting up a pad has a lot less initial investment. Being able to keep your kids or local workers in the community who would otherwise leave for a cheaper market. And I have to stress, I talked to a lot of people who this was a big concern, was that this was a way that they could keep their kids. And a lot of them don't want to say anything because they're scared they'll get in trouble, because they do have their kids living there right now in this condition. For non-ALR properties, it's a cheap way to have workers live on their property if they need workers. A lot of tiny home tenants are really happy to help out. It creates a legal pathway to having a tiny home and RV dwelling that makes it easier for the city to inspect. And I think this is a really, really important point. We obviously do have these here right now, but we want to make sure that the water situation is safe and being not draining aquifers, and that the sanitation is being dealt with properly. And that also, if people who are living there currently, which we know there are right now, that they don't need to worry about getting reported and losing their home. That the worst thing that happens is it gets inspected and brought into compliance. So, and another great thing about these is they have a low environmental impact. They're not permanent structures. So obviously a suite is. So when your tenants leave, they take your house with them. And that's them leaving. And then you have the land back to what it was before. So are they safe? I'll maybe try to speed up with this a little bit, and you can all maybe have a closer look. So there are codes. The province has been a bit funny about like kind of making a defined space for RVs and tiny homes, but we do know that they are using them for to create tiny home villages for homeless people in Victoria. And there definitely are tiny home villages popping up in rural areas around the province. So in a small numbers, but it is happening. RVs, for example, are certified to RV codes, and they are insurable for full-time living. So you can't, like, if the insurance companies are okay with it, I think that's pretty good. Water, that's an important one. So they can be hooked up to existing plumbing, or if there's an issue with the water currently there, like the aquifer's not going to take it, it's possible to purchase a water tank and have it brought in. You can also set up rainwater barrels and stuff like that. So you can get a 3,000 gallon tank and have it delivered, and that lasts about 2 people 2 months or something like that. Sanitation is one of the biggest concerns that people have, and that is a big concern, and which is another reason why we should put this into regulations so that we can look at this. And a lot of the big thing with this is you could hook it into existing sewage if that is going to be a problem. Like, you know, obviously we would want people to inspect it and check it. And if that is not going to work, you can get sewage tanks and have the sewage trucked out.
Okay. You're finished your 10 minutes. So
Okay.
So do a quick wrap up, and then I'll open it up for committee to have questions for you.
Okay.
And then from there we'll move on to public participation.
Okay, so I'll just use my little closing points here. So like I said, none of these things are going to turn the housing crisis around. That's fair. Many of the factors that got us into this are going to take many actions from multiple levels of government. We can't keep saying it's someone else's responsibility, though, because let's face it, it's affecting everyone one way or another. Amending this bylaw would alleviate some homelessness, and it is likely to open the door to more communities wanting to show that they can also do their part in this way. I don't think maybe more than 50, maybe 100 property, I would be very surprised if even that, people decided to take advantage of this. Can you imagine what it would mean, though, to those 50 or so people or couples? From the stories I've heard, it would mean a lot. And as I've mentioned, for a lot of people that are already living in tiny homes and RVs in Metchosin, it would mean safety. And it would also mean those sites would be inspected. Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you did well for your first presentation to council. Thank you for that. So, sorry, Wendy, just before.
Can I just ask a question first? Everyone here knows who I am, but I will say Wendy Mitchell, 580 Woody Beach Road. And I don't actually know who the person is that was presenting. I don't know where she lives. I know that you referred to her as Sarah, and I didn't hear her introduce herself.
Wendy's not wrong. So on your agenda, it's Sarah Anthony, and as a usually for presenters, have them do their name, but or their name and address, but it's fine. Yeah. If you wanted to come back up to the podium, we'll ask for some questions from mayor and council. So typically what happens, what Wendy was referring to was at our meetings we do for recording purposes, take names and addresses. So I'm sorry, I was remiss in asking. So please state your name.
I knew that, and I probably should have done that. Yeah, Sarah Anthony, 4290 Metchosin Road.
Okay, thank you. I'll open it up to committee. Is there any questions that you would like to ask Sarah at this time? Nope. Okay, so you're off the hook for the time being. Tom?
Mayor and Councilor, Thomas Cole, 3960 Hibbert Lane. I'm going to let you know that our home was built 25 years ago. It was the first house in Metchosin that was built with a legal suite in it, and it went through council. I would let you know that my septic field was doubled. My field was doubled. It cost me over $14,000 just for my septic field. And I am for changing the bylaw. However, we have to be very, very careful when it comes to septic and also sewer removal. We don't want to try and ruin the aquifer that we already have. So when it comes to changing the bylaw, I'm for it, and I'm for the tiny homes, and I'm also for having RVs. We don't want to turn it into a jungle, and we want to try to make sure we protect our aquifer. So somewhere when you're trying to change the bylaw, you have to write in there about septic and septic removal. Thank you.
Thank you. We're into public participation. You're up.
Go ahead.
Mine's very short. Mine's very short and has nothing to do with the topic. I just wish to, I would hope with the new system this wouldn't be necessary. I wish to remind council members to speak directly into your microphone, please, because otherwise it's very hard to hear you. Thank you. Oh, and press your button. Thank you.
Which button?
It's the blue button, which I don't have as chair, which is why this microphone is on all the time. I followed your lead, which is what got me into trouble at the last meeting, Mayor Rance. Jay.
Jay Shukin, 5340 Levon Road, and also speaking as president of the Association for the Protection of Rural Metchosin. So thank you, Sarah, for your presentation. Well done. The APRM has carefully considered this concept, and we've been thinking about it for quite some time. I have to say we do not believe that a change is in the best interest of Metchosin, a change to the bylaw. And as we've outlined those reasons in a letter sent to council. This is also on our website as well. I'll just summarize some of those points here. So first of all, tiny homes and RVs are not anywhere near comparable to a detached secondary suite, and certainly not a secondary suite within a house. So the premise that RVs and tiny homes and the regulations binding them could stand with a detached secondary suite in Section 23 of the land use bylaw is really dubious to our perspective. Now, for example, detached secondary suites require significant investment by the property owners. They require building permits, which require plans and plumbing and structural and electrical inspections. The investment made for that structure is often done so that structure will stand for decades, if not a century. There's a foundation for living, both in literal and figurative terms. That's not the case with a tiny house, which can be tiny house on wheels, which can be moved onto a property within hours. And while they're not necessarily cheap, the level of investment in a tiny house is simply not the same as a detached secondary suite. Now, I mentioned foundation. As RVs and tiny homes on wheels are not considered permanent structures, there is no applicable taxes at the municipal level in allowing these alternative structures to serve as dwellings. So the property owner may receive rent, but that's a matter between him and the federal government in terms of taxes. There's no municipal implications in terms of increased taxes. So essentially, what you're having is the potential of a bylaw amendment leading to, with allowing tiny homes and RVs to serve as secondary dwellings. That could see our population increase significantly, while the ability to pay for services like policing would essentially remain stagnant, And further, what this means is that you create a situation where residents living in permanent homes are subsidizing those living in alternative dwellings. And good luck with changing that regulation in terms of the taxation, because you're looking at a change probably in the BC legislature to the BC Assessment Act. So while we sympathize with those who are facing housing affordability issues, and many of us have family in a situation where they are living in precarious housing, we question whether allowing tiny homes and RVs will actually serve those impacted by housing affordability issues. And the proposal here seems to be based on the premise of having a socially conscious private landowner doing three things. First of all, hosting that alternative housing. Second, ensuring that that housing actually goes to people who are worthy of that alternative housing. And by Sarah's presentation, it seems to be well-intentioned, hardworking people who are facing housing issues. And third, that the rent for that remains affordable. And with the bylaw power available to the municipality, you cannot compel private landowners to do any of those things. I would suggest that the real opportunity here is not for affordable housing options, but for private landowners to develop short-term vacation rental suites or simply rental spots for RVs and fifth wheels. And a very likely outcome is that simply the rents find themselves elevated in a way that they are throughout the CRD. So three more things, very quickly. We do have deep misgivings about this proposal. Things like district resources to manage this program, sanitation and environmental impacts, and the fact that Metchosin is far from the ideal place to develop housing affordability options, given our distance from job centers, schools, and the limited public transportation that we have. So sorry, almost done here. I will close by saying that Metchosin has already made a major contribution to providing land for affordable housing. Recall that the 2017 land swap between Metchosin, Langford, and Beach Bay resulted in 350 acres being withdrawn from Metchosin, turned over to Langford, and there's 80 acres that is now under construction in terms of developing 280 new homes built in a cluster fashion. So we urge council to not move ahead with the amending the land use bylaw. Introducing ad hoc housing solutions will have potentially serious and adverse impacts on Metchosin. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jay.
Diana Smith, 4488 William Head Road. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my partner, Dorothy Elias. So, Mayor and Council, my partner, Dorothy Elias, and I would like to support the proposal brought to Council by Sarah Anthony for the legal ability to have either one tiny house, one RV, or a secondary suite in Metchosin for all the reasons that she outlined. And I also wanted you to know we're not planning to, if there is a bylaw like this, we're not planning to take advantage of it, so we're not speaking from self-interest. We would ask Mayor and Council to seriously consider how this proposal can best be enacted, making sure issues of health and safety, including the safety, fire safety, can be properly addressed and done in a timely manner. The APRM has made many points against the proposal, so the remarks I'm going to make are mostly in reaction to what some of the things they have said. So we support the proposal for the following reasons. Everyone present doesn't need statistics to know there's a housing crisis at all levels to do both with affordability and supply. People at the bottom of the housing chain, those that can only afford to rent a small dwelling, deserve and need housing as much or more so than all of us with the privilege to own property and housing in Metchosin. This is not a Victoria housing problem, it's not a Langford housing problem or a Metchosin housing problem or anywhere else's problem. It's a global problem, and what we can think. And while we can think globally, we can best act locally. I also live near the cafe, and the number of ads for housing in Metchosin there's always tons of them there, people trying to find places to live here. This is a modest and doable proposal. As Sarah said, it's not going to solve the issue, but would provide a little bit of help. The RPRM response to the proposal is disappointing on many levels. It says Metchosin is not an ideal location to have affordable housing. We beg to differ. What a great place to come home to after either working locally. For instance, my chosen cafe had to close a while back because they couldn't get enough staff. And volunteer firefighters, I hear, are desperate for accommodation in Metchosin. So you're either working locally or commuting from surrounding neighborhoods. And for working people, commuting is very common. You know, it's not it's people who work are used to commuting. Working people in Metchosin commute now. Commuting is often a reality, especially for lower paid workers. The APRM says that one reason our little bit of paradise is not suitable is because of limited transit. First of all, if more people already living in Metchosin left their cars at home and used transit, we may have an improved service and we would be helping the environment. The only person I've ever known in Metchosin to use transit was Joel Usery, who doesn't live here anymore. Use it or lose it. Tiny house renters who couldn't afford vehicles would be helping the environment, helping us justify better transit and providing a much needed good example. Also, I recall a presentation made by BC Transit to this council on how they are currently improving the service. Environmentally speaking, tiny house and RV renters can be a huge inspiration to us. People have made points they're vastly different to secondary suites. Well, that is the point. They are so, they don't have such a big environmental impact as a secondary suite. They're not as expensive as you were saying. They could have a much smaller environmental footprint. Likely as not, they also can't afford, people who live in them can't afford to fly or own recreational vehicles, so we're not ruining the planet with air miles or road miles. Some tiny house and RV dwellers choose to live this way, not because they can't afford anything but bigger, but because of the low environmental impact. If only more of us would follow this example. If Metchosinites are worried about tiny houses and RVs, they should look around. There are many of both in Metchosin with little worry of consequence from the district right now. If there were a bylaw allowing one tiny house or RV, it wouldn't be the present people who have illegal RVs and tiny houses who would apply for permission. They likely wouldn't want to invite inspection of their property. It is people who want to legally offer one safe place for someone to live. That's, I'm guessing. The APRM says that the rural nature of Metchosin means bigger distances to amenities. Of course, we know that. Tiny house users choosing to live here probably would see the joy of living here worth the inconvenience, just like the rest of us. They would work things out just like the rest of us. The RPM says achieving affordable housing goals are uncertain. There's no more reason why tiny house and RV owners will be or should be more or less responsible than all other landlords, but any increase in housing will have an overall positive effect. Although,
Diane.
Yes?
Sorry, I was trying to
my
find it.
time's up.
It's well up. So it's, and it's not, and you're doing well. It's just there's a lot there. So perhaps you could.
Last sentence.
Okay.
Let's do what we can to be part of the solution. Let's share the wealth in a responsible way.
If I could ask, maybe you could email that to staff tomorrow?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I am going to bring in the 4-minute rule. So next speaker, I'm timing, so to those who have to keep it to those 4 minutes.
How about I keep it to about 2 minutes?
Okay. I'll time you anyways and let you know.
Jennifer Burgess, 3837 Duke Road. And I'm not speaking from paper, so this may be a little convoluted. However, I think that there may be one perspective that council needs to take a little step back and think about adding to this conversation and the discussion. And I would say that council needs to review several areas of assisted housing that is being developed. First of all, the agricultural land reserve have come up with an increase in their ability to house workers who will be working in farms. Now, let's face it, we are a farm-oriented community, so it'd be interesting to see if we can look at what ALR is doing for their farm land areas. And we have many, many properties that are farm status, I'm not talking specifically of ALR, but properties that are farm status, where about a dozen sheep go into a property every now and then, and over the year they're allowed to have much lower taxes than I have. The advantage, though, here would be certainly, I think, to enhance the ability of these small farmers to find the staff that they need and be able to provide for the same kind of ambiance that we want in this community. So I'd just like to add that. Thanks.
Thank you. Minute 40.
I don't have any prepared notes on this, and I think it was a very good presentation that Sarah made, but I'm against it. And I think this is such a big issue. This is as big as the secondary housing issue that really divided Metchosin, and we ended up in a public hearing. And I would hate to see this outgoing council make any decision on this. I think it's big enough to deserve a public hearing. We've done our share, as Jay has mentioned, we've done our share for housing by saying that every property can have an in-house suite or a detached secondary suite. That's our contribution. We don't want to attract a whole lot of temporary, transient people. That's not how you build community. There's a boon for the property owner because they're collecting rent with very little outlay. Maybe they'll put a cement pad in and hook up some services, and then they get to collect rent on this. But it's a cost to the district. As Jay pointed out, the district would have more people and not another dime of property tax to pay for the services. We don't want to be housing a lot of transient and temporary people. We want to build community, and we want there to be a balance between the property owners paying taxes and the services that are required. And this is tipping the scale the wrong way. So I would like council to kick this down the road to the next council, and then let it be treated with the seriousness that it deserves, because it would be a big change in our community as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Just before the next speaker, I just wanted to touch on a couple of things that you'd said. So first of all, thank you very much for acknowledging Sarah's presentation and for your remarks as well. Just so that process-wise, as far as the public knows, any change to our land use bylaw requires a public hearing. So this proposal would be something that would require a change to the land use bylaw, which would then trigger a public hearing process, which includes advertisement, which includes a whole host of things. So it's not something that can be done quickly regardless of whether we had an election coming up in 2 months or not. It is a process that has to be followed. This is an initial presentation. It's being made to this council. The council of the day is still relevant. And so it will be up to the next council to decide how to proceed further, but it is perfectly acceptable for it to be presented now, and we can start the conversation. But there is an entire process that has to happen for a change to the land use bylaw.
Thank you.
Cool. Next speaker.
Anita Strauss, 1195 Woodley Gill. It was a very interesting presentation, very slickly done. Well done, Sarah, and your partners, I presume. But I'm also opposed to it, partly for the reason of building community. We don't want to turn Metchosin into a gigantic RV park. If we want to do RV, and with the loss of Petter Bay, there was a whole bunch of people that got displaced. There's still Swears Beach, but that's not very much. But basically, I don't see anything in the bylaw, and I'm not an expert at this, but I don't see anything in the bylaw that prevents you from installing a secondary detached suite, a tiny home or RV. It's just that if you do that as a secondary suite, which I would advise that we enforce, is that you have to make sure that you have the proper septic involved. You have to make sure that it's not going to impact the aquifer unduly, and that it's safe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And plus it gets put on the assessment of the property, and therefore there is taxes paid to Metchosin to pay for the service that these people will consume. They will take fire, they will take roads, they will take the police, they will take our parks. and we welcome them. This is not a matter of not welcoming people. It's a matter of saying that this is a community. We all pitch in together, and I'm not prepared to have hundreds, dozens. I don't know how many would actually take this up. I don't see why the rest of us have to subsidize a style of living that that isn't paying anything into the community to help the community thrive. I have a small house. It's not quite tiny, but it's very, very small. And I pay my taxes, and I'm quite happy to do that because I want to be part of this community. I think that we need to be very careful about what we're appealing to here. We cannot solve a systemic problem like poor housing. The solution to it, quite frankly, is to eradicate greed. I mean, people build. People say, "Oh, well, we can do subsidized housing for poor people here in Metchosin, and we'll build a secondary suite." And then they charge $1,800. Well, if you really were that altruistic, you would charge $300. But that's not what's happening, right? So I don't see why, if people, that's what we need to address. What we need to address is the fact that people are trying to monetize their properties, and that's fine up to a point. This is a rural community, and I don't think that as a community building exercise, I already have a bed and breakfast. I have a farm, grow up, that has a number of trailers that are allowed because they are workers for his grow up, right? I have lots of transient people in my neighborhood already. And if everybody else starts adding a portable thing, then we're going to have more. Essentially, I don't see any reason why you can't have a tiny home. I would like to put a tiny home on a proper built foundation with proper resources to make sure that septic, because remember that even if you have composting toilets, as her letter actually talked about, that's a hazardous waste. And if that is not done, disposed of properly, and if these are wild all over the place and Metchosin can't police them, what's going to happen is that somebody's going to end up with contaminated land. The cost of remediation that will be so much that they will walk away with it, and the district will be left with contaminated soil all over Metchosin. We already have a number of dumps that have the same issue. So I am opposed to the rental temporary nature of this proposal. I am not opposed. I think it's a great idea. Put a tiny home on a foundation, put an RV on a foundation. Those are great alternative housing, and they do cost much less, but don't be deluded that they do not have environmental impact. They have the same amount of impact as anything else on the soil and on the environment. What they are reducing is the amount of materials used to construct them. That's the only difference.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Anita. Well done. Okay. Just as a quick note, Stephen, before you start, I've just been advised that once we hit 8 o'clock, it is 45 minutes of public participation. So depending on how the conversation is going, I may or may not extend it at that time.
Good evening, Stephen Sawyer, 1498 Neeld Road. It's been a few years since I've come to a council meeting, and I'm glad to be back here for this one. And I don't want to address the presentation directly, but I would like to ask a few rhetorical questions. We came to Metchosin because we like the rural ambience. We love the ruralness. But how do we know how much is rural? Or how do we measure our ruralness? Do we have any key performance indicators that say this is the acceptable level of ruralness, this is not? Do we have some things like our traffic light, for example, would be a thin edge of the wedge, and we say, right, that's not acceptable because it's not rural. So do we have anything that says that measures these kinds of things? And we probably don't. Can we do it? I don't know. Would it be hard to do? Yes, it probably would. But there's I'm just because of where I live, I get impacted by what's happening in our neighbor Langford for all the noise and everything that's happening on Dudney Flats and all of that kind of stuff. And so there are impacts that we don't have any control over, but there's also some impacts that we do have control over. So in a bigger picture, how do we measure our degree of ruralness? And the secondary suite issue, I recall it being a huge bone of contention and a bit of a divisiveness within the community. And this presentation and this proposal has the potential to go along a similar path. I'm not for or against it at this point in time. I'd have to do a lot more thinking about it. But people have brought up some good points on both sides of the equation here. And I'm just wondering how much ruralness do we want? How do we measure it? And what do we do about it? And I'll leave that in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think I've ever heard the term ruralness before.
No, I think I invented it.
Okay.
Kathy Sulit, 900 Neff Road. I just wanted to make a point here, adding to Anita's thing. A rural area, each property is unique. You don't know if there's a seasonal creek running through one. You look at the diagrams of that young boy that did all those creek maps in Metchosin. You have to be really, really careful. You don't know if you're living next to somebody whose well is just barely producing. And if you double that, what's coming out of the ground, you can affect the person beside that. So you can't make a blanket decision on properties that are rural because each one is unique, as well as the diversity of animal life, plant life, insect life that comes through there. And we who've lived here all these years, we all value that. So I want you to think about that. Okay.
Thank you, Kathy. Anyone else?
I really support this motion. I think that
I believe it's Eric. Right?
Oh, Eric White, 4290 Metchosin Road. Everybody's worthy of a roof over their head. What Metchosin can do with the least amount of impact and footprint is probably the best approach to help a larger problem. And a way to solve problems like believing that these people won't be contributing their tax dollars is to put something like an annual inspection fee and say $500 per secondary or tiny home, and say there's 100 in Metchosin, that's like $50,000 a year. That almost pays for one new staff member, which could essentially look over all of them in a day, and then he's got the rest of the year to do other Metchosin tasks, and it would actually benefit our community as a whole. I think it's also super important for the safety of our community in the future, as we need to attract young people who want to be here, and we also need to protect our elderly people who want to stay here. And tiny secondary homes are a great way to have someone near you who can, generally look over your property and say, oh, they're doing all right today, or their sheep are still in, or it's all good today, right? It's a great way to protect everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy Atherton, 4995 LeBon Road. So, dear Mayor, Grants, and Council, I'm speaking to the letter and presentation from Sarah Anthony regarding a proposed amendment to include tiny homes and RVs in bylaw number 259. On reading the current bylaw, I don't actually see anything that already prohibits the use of an RV or tiny home in place of a detached secondary suite on any property greater than 1.98 acres. It's commendable to want to create more housing for those struggling to find a place to live. However, the potential outcome is that these cute tiny homes could actually become nothing more than short-term Airbnbs. To quote from Sarah's letter, most tiny homes are actually quite cute and built to fit a rural aesthetic. While you may not love the look of RVs, they are everywhere anyway. Every other property in Metchosin is storing 5 of their closest friends' RVs for them. So, speaking of which, perhaps someone from staff or council can clarify if there is a limit to the number of RVs that can be parked on property for storage, and are there any regulations on whether those RVs in storage are actually being used or can be used as residences on the properties. And therein lies the problem. With our complaint-driven bylaw enforcement policy, there is going to be an onus on neighbors to be seeing to it that the regulations pertaining to any tiny homes and RVs are adhered to. We already have enough conflict in Metchosin regarding bylaw enforcement and the whole complaint-driven policy. And if you add more tiny homes and RVs to this, I think you're going to accentuate that problem. There's already legal provisions for secondary dwellings on most properties in Metchosin. Let's work within the existing framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Carrie?
Oops. My name is Carrie Hill, 4203 Leron Place. Speaking to council as a long-term, 21 and a half plus years resident of Metchosin, a previous landowner as well in Metchosin, and a farmer for all of that 21 plus years. I am not a transient nor a difficult or, I don't know, homeless resident. I have raised 4 of my children here. I'm facing homelessness due to factors that are not in my control coming up this spring. As a farmer and a person who has livestock, I am not able to find housing anywhere outside of this district to house my children and my large animals, small animals. Sannage, it's unaffordable. I am fully in support of this bylaw. It would be great to own my own RV on somebody's property where I would be able to have a long-term livable situation where I had a pad rental. I would totally and completely accept that, as well as being able to increase the value and of a person's property and help them out on their farm as well. Well, the loss of housing in our community is huge. I am one of many people that will lose their housing this spring or this year. And I'm unable to find anywhere else. So that is a concern for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. We've reached 8 o'clock. Chris, I would never.
Last time you folks gave me 5 minutes, so this
just,
is like
just as an
under 2.
FYI, Chris is a former colleague.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And there is no way I would ever cut her off at the microphone.
Chris Moore, 4545 William Head Road. Obviously, I'm here to speak to Sarah's presentation, and you know my position on this. I've made it clear. I think it's broadly shared, but we'll find out. I'm here to endorse the comments that I've heard primarily from Jay Shukin and Anita Strauss, and a few others. Anyway, as I said, I've spoken to this at length a number of weeks ago, so I'm not going to repeat the thrust of that message other than to restate that Metchosin, as you all know, has the earliest adopted and most liberal residential housing bylaws in the entire CRD. That's to our credit. That's been there for 30 years. I don't want to prompt a debate because this is not the venue, but I've got a question to the promoters this evening is, what's your problem, frankly? What precisely in our existing bylaw, particularly 259, as they apply to residential dwellings, prevents a version of the tiny, or shall I say small home, but please on a more permanent, less itinerant basis, and one that we can manage, make sure that it is operating the way it's supposed to be, a la our detached secondary suites. And I don't believe that there is a minimal size attached to that. If this is leading to an increase in density, and it will quite possibly do that, and these folks are expecting some kind of wholesale adoption of this very vague concept, I can assure you that the vast majority of Metchosin residents is not remotely interested. I guess that will be tested. The bigger concern for Metchosin residents, I think, as you know, is the apparent lack of enforcement of our land use bylaws as they currently exist. And until we get our heads around that one and have it properly managed, there's no way anybody should go down this path. I trust, or at least hope, that you as our current elected officials will recognize that this, in its presented form, is a non-fit for this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. May I just get a quick poll? How many other speakers would like to speak? Okay, then you'll likely be my last speaker, so if you can come to the podium.
Hey, Bradley Russell.
Sorry, I didn't catch your first name.
Bradley Russell. Honored to be here speaking to the council. 4730 Eels Road. I just wanted to say I actually moved to a tiny home in Metchosin because I didn't have community in Victoria, because I had nothing but people that around me that didn't really appreciate where I was living in Victoria, and obviously the pressure of bills and everything was too much for a lot of people. So I actually moved out here to a friend's property so that I could have more community, so I could cut down on my impact on the environment, so I could we have our own water brought in. I deal with my own compost toilet myself. I've actually done it at other properties before. It's super simple. It's no more difficult than taking a horse poop and putting it in a stall the same way. It's not like some big environmental thing. So I think it's interesting that there's a privileged point of view about this that doesn't really know what it's like to actually live in this situation. And I must say that there's two sides of this, and obviously I think it needs more evaluation, and I appreciate that you guys are looking into it, and I appreciate that you've let Sarah speak tonight, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. With that, at this point, unless there's someone who has something idealistically new to add, I'm going to move on to the next part of our agenda. And also, I would like to say thank you to Sarah, our presenter, and to all of you who have spoken tonight. This has probably been one of the most enlightening and enjoyable discussions I think that we've had in regards to something that could possibly be controversial, but is not necessarily. So again, thank you very much for your comments and your presentations tonight. Okay, so we have, moving on then to adoption of our minutes. We have one that came up from the April 11th meeting. We have received it at council, but it hasn't actually been adopted at this committee. So can I have a motion, please, to approve, probably both can be done, April 11th and July 18th. Okay, moved by Mayor Rands, seconded by Councillor Epp. Called to question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the DVP for 1290 Neil Road. First thing I would say is probably we should, actually I'll ask, is the applicant present? Okay, perfect. Did you want to speak to this? You can, or you can answer questions of the committee. I can answer questions. Okay, perfect. One of the first things I'll say is we probably would like to schedule a site visit. Would that be?
Hello, Warren Littlejohn, 1290 Neil Road. Certainly a site visit is welcomed. Yeah, we can accommodate that.
Okay, excellent. Committee, what's your wish? Mayor Rand?
I don't even think that a site visit is necessary. The report is very thorough, and the reasons for the variance, which is slight, make perfect sense to me. So I'm happy to move the options.
First option would be, I think the one you're trying to refer to is request that staff send notices to landowners within 60 meters of the property, informing them of the application and the September 12th, 2022 council meeting when issuance of the permit will be considered.
And that gives opportunity for neighbors to weigh in on it.
Well, the applicant is required to petition his neighbors, and I believe you've already started that process, if not completed it. Can I have a seconder to the motion and we can discuss? Councillor McKinnon? Councillor Little?
Yeah, in the options, it'll be September 19th. It won't be the September 12th meeting. And I would be in favor of a site visit. I think we should always have a site visit for variance applications to do our due process.
There's nothing prohibiting us from moving forward on this recommendation for the 19th. Thank you. We will be at UBCM on the 12th. And that in between that time period, if staff can arrange with you and members of council that wish to have a site visit.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. With that, I'll call the question on the motion. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. That's it for now.
Okay, thank you.
I think it will be Tina that will probably get a hold of you to find some dates and times that are suitable for you, and then we'll coordinate council's scheduling.
Great, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next item up on the agenda is the presentation that Sarah and Anthony made. Is there a wish from this committee, or at this point are we receiving the information? I'm happy to jump in here and there's nobody else from committee. There you go.
Wow. This is a little awkward, having to hold your finger on the button, but
But I can hear you so much.
yeah. Well, the reality is that the CRD, it's a red button that we have to push in order to activate the microphone. So I've been pushing the red button, so that shows you how much attention I've been paying to Lisa. Yeah, I think that I would move receipt of this. This is obviously an item for the next council, but I would like to kind of just comment on it.
That's fine.
If I may.
Yeah.
If there's a seconder to the receipt motion. Yeah.
Seconded by Councillor McKinnon.
It's interesting to me that, and I think you've recognized it as well, Chair, that this is a lot like the detached arguments that we faced when we had to when we went through the detached suite issues, and it was divisive, and there were a lot of very strong opinions one way or the other. And I'm certainly glad that I'm not going to have to deal with this one. So, but what I see here, first of all, I was quite heartened to see the people who feel as strongly as I do that Metchosin should not be expected to undertake urban problems. We're a rural community. We provide rural things. Affordable housing is far better suited into the municipalities that are already urban. But I don't see this as so much as an affordable housing issue in the classic sense. I think that the RV aspect of this makes sense to me. The tiny homes, well, you've got building code issues and everything else. So I kind of think the tiny homes issue is something for the future once the province gets its head around tiny homes and everything else. But from an RV perspective, it as long as it meets the codes, and I know Tom spoke about the septic and everything else, and of course anything like that, if we were to approve, or we or the future council were to approve having a third edition to the bylaw, which says you could either have, as explained, an attached suite, a detached suite, or in what I'm recommending would be an RV pad. All of them have to meet the codes. So you would have to have the septic disposals, all of the health and safety issues met, all of the various codes. But the advantages to it, and I go back to the arguments that we made during the detached suite issue. The advantages to the RV addresses a lot of the concerns with the attached suite, or the detached suite issues, in that they're very easily removed. A person can put the pad in, meet the codes, probably won't be cheap because of meeting the codes, but still cheaper than building a detached suite. And once you build the detached suite, it's there. You're never going to move it. It costs so much to build them that you are adding a permanent structure, an additional permanent structure to the residence. With an RV pad, you're not. All you're adding is a cement pad and the hookups. And because of that, it makes it a lot easier to deal with bylaw issues, to deal with any difficulties that might accrue from it, because you can just simply tell them to get it off. And you're not creating anything that will be permanent. You're not creating an argument, and this was another argument that was made, and another reason why when we created the bylaw in the first place, we said you have to have it within 50 feet, I guess it was. What was it? It's 15 meters or something? Yeah, of the primary residence. And part of the reason, well, one of the reasons is that the homeowner has to live with the problems that come from the tenants that they bring in. But the second reason is that we didn't want any excuses, any hardship reasons to come back in the future for future subdivision. And we believed that if we had a common driveway and it was close to the residence, then you couldn't say in the future, well, I have to be able to subdivide this and, for these hardship reasons. The RV pads provide that. There are no hardship reasons to subdivide, because these are temporary RVs that are owned by the person generally that would be parking on the pad. So I think that the RV aspect of this solves a lot of the concerns that we had with the permanent detached. So, I mean, there was a statement made of that our firefighters can't have a place to live. Well, I mean, that has been a problem that the chief has been concerned about for years, is that we rely on our youth firefighters to put in 5 years service, 4 years service to the community, and then we realize that they're going to move on. Well, this provides these opportunities. So it solves problems, a number of problems really, and I don't believe that the concerns were that the whole community was going to change with the detached. Well, that didn't happen. I mean, we only have a handful of people that actually built the detached. And I don't think that it's going to be that much of an impact with an RV pad either. So I would hope that the next council at least takes it to a public hearing so that the public can weigh in on it and looks at the advantages as well as the disadvantages. I don't, as somebody that has been committed most of my adult life to keeping this place rural, I don't believe that this is going to be a compromise to any of the rural nature of this community. So anyway, sorry to take so long on that, but I'm only going to get another chance.
Well,
we got one more meeting, so.
I will say, for those in the room who are considering running for council, it's very possible that should this matter come forward and it does go to public hearing, you may actually be hearing from retired Mayor Rands at that point in time. But anyways.
I hope not.
You'd be surprised. Any other comments? Sorry, Councillor McKinnon, I didn't see your hand come up.
First of all, I'd like to thank everybody who spoke tonight. I was very impressed. I know we've got some very different opinions in this room, and we heard an awful lot of people speak very passionately and very eloquently tonight with some very different viewpoints on these issues. And mostly what I could see was everybody listening carefully to all of these well-reasoned arguments. And that's an ideal democratic situation. It doesn't get any better than that. So thank you everybody for that. I agree with Mayor Rands. Obviously this is going to, if this moves forward, it's going to require a large public meeting. We're going to have to convene the community. It is going to be another divisive issue, and it's not something that's going to happen in the next 6 weeks. At the same time, I'm wondering what we can do to ensure that our next council, who will be the ones who are giving this serious consideration or not, it will be up to the next council, of course. If there's what we can do between now and then to help make their task simpler. One of the things that occurred to me tonight is that we've heard very different opinions on things like the impact of these changes on the population of Metchosin. The financial implications of this kind of change with respect to our inability to apply property taxes to some of these other modes of accommodations, and as Chair of Finance, what that might mean to Metchosin and to all of the other taxpayers. And it would be nice to have some clarity around some of these issues moving forward for whoever's considering this issue in the future.
If I may, we have both staff members beside me have been taking notes vigorously, and both of them, as well as we're having this recorded. I would suspect that the next council, this is one of the things that's probably going to be coming up forward with the council orientation, and part of that would be then to sort of instruct the new council as to how they move forward, asking for staff reports. And the points that have been made tonight, and I do agree with you, like there was a wide range of opinions and points made on all sides of the aspect, that those pieces of information are then compiled and brought forward to the next council to start to consider. So tax implications, whether or not it's looking at just simply RV pads, sort of drilling down as to what it is that would be brought forward to the next council for consideration, and ultimately to the public during a public hearing process. So I don't suspect that over the next 6 to 8 weeks that this item is going to be lost. I suspect, in fact, there will be further conversations both at this table and during the election process. So I can't imagine that this item would not be coming forward to the next council to deal with, at least to get started on at the very beginning of their term. So I'm going to do first-time speakers, Councillor Epp, Councillor Little, and then Mayor Rance.
Well, there are a lot of communities around BC in general and all over that are considering this issue, I think, as we speak. So we had it was great to hear all the opinions tonight and all the ideas. There's certainly a lot of them, but I think that it'll be really important to work with other communities and work with the province to deal with all the pros and cons of these issues. The taxation, the inspections, the not avoiding backyard campgrounds, and so on. So I'm hoping that some of us are going to the UBCM conference in September, and this might be a really good chance for us to discuss this issue with some of the other communities and just see how it's progressing, because I think it's a bigger issue than just Metchosin. And when we base our decisions, I think it should be on something that we get a lot of opinions from a lot of different places to really make the best decision on what to do here.
Thank you. Good point. Councillor Little.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for your presentation, and I thank everybody for your comments on both sides. It's been very insightful for me. So I recognize that there's a significant housing affordability pressures on the Capital Regional District. I recognize that this correspondence and proposal is a conversation starter, and I see it as that, a conversation starter, and that's where it should stop. This should be for the next council, absolutely. I think we should collate all the comments and pass it on to the next council as has been suggested. Right now, knowing what I know, I have dire concerns about the safety and the fiscal implications for the district. These have already been stated, so I won't belabor it. Safety. It was said that if an insurance company is okay with it, we should be okay with it. Well, I'd rather be our fire chief and the fire department be okay with it, and the codes be okay with it. We do have a very fragile aquifer 606. Even if you're trucking in the water's coming from somewhere. So that's a concern of mine. Safety and fiscal, as I've mentioned, is my major concerns. In this agenda package on page 26, we do have a bylaw enforcement update. And Councillor Kahakawila, you did state that the So this was regarding May 16th Planning Committee meeting. For further discussion, Councillor Kahakawila stated that the noise bylaw is still work in progress and there are a few other bylaws that need to be dealt with first, like the tree cutting bylaw. We haven't seen either. We're at the end of the term. I was a bit surprised to see this on here, although it's not wrong. It's a conversation starter. But there are other bylaws. The bylaw 259, I've got it here. It's very comprehensive. It's over 100 pages long. It's complex. And I think we would need, or the next council actually needs to go through it thoroughly with public input and public implication. And I also wanted to agree with Diana Smith that this is not a Langford or a Metchosin problem. However, I respectfully disagree with one of my elders that the District of Metchosin actually does show a lot of compassion. I am appointed as the commissioner for the CRD Regional Housing Trust Fund. That we haven't met for over a year, but we have moved to adopt affordable and market rate and apartments and building of such, and so that is a contribution that we have made with a commissioner on the Regional Housing Trust. Also, speaking of compassion, I'm the chair of the Victoria Family Court and Youth Justice, so I do think that this council does show compassion in a broader sense of the word. And also, I think it's worthwhile pointing out that we did, as the president of the APRM suggested, that we did contribute land that will be used very shortly to over 250 homes, and it is a contribution. And as the councillor with farming in my portfolio and agriculture, I do worry about the encroachment on valuable farmland. The Agricultural Land Commission, the ALC, has moved to increase the availability or the regulations for farmers to add additional housing for their farmers if they so choose. So I thank you for this conversation starter, but it's very complex to amend a bylaw like this, especially when we've got other bylaws we've been dying to get at. So thank you.
No, and thank you very much for bringing those two bylaws up. I will just comment on that. First of all, the noise bylaw is one that it was something that we knew that could be, that may end up having to be pushed back because of other things that came up as a bigger priority. Some of that is the fact that we've had a new planner take over, and the priority for our planner is dealing with applications, and that council projects it comes next. So the noise bylaw is a council project that I brought forward, and so it got shelved while the planner was dealing with immediate matters that needed to be dealt with. As far as the tree management bylaw, that's something that Councillor McKinnon and I had discussion with and to bring forward through MEASC, and we can follow up afterwards and sort of see where that's at. But absolutely, there are many things on the plate that need to be looked at, and the new council is going to have a discussion with their staff as to where we would like to put our resources for this municipality. So there's a lot at play here, and this presentation, as I stated earlier, while this council's term is wrapping up, we are still relevant, and this sets the stage for the next council to start looking at it. Mayor Rands, you were next.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that this is probably the longest receipt motion that I've seen in a long time. And as for the next council, I think what we can refer to that is what they used to call baptism by fire.
Yes, very much so. Okay, if there's no more discussion on the receiving motion, I will call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. One last thing, we have the articles of correspondence brought into us on the Pinkston Supplemental. Can I have a motion to receive? And again, these documents will also move forward with the presentations that have happened tonight. Move receipt by Councillor McKinnon, seconded by Mayor Rands. Call to question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, can I have a motion, please, to adjourn the Planning Committee meeting, and we'll move on to Parks. Moved by Councillor Little, seconded by Councillor McKinnon. Call to question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you.
Okay, welcome everybody. This is the Parks meeting agenda for August 22nd. We have pink, that's my counselor's report. That will be added, and so we'll amend. I'd like to propose amending the agenda. That's not a verbal report, it's a written report. It's here. With that, I'll take a motion to approve the agenda. Moved by Councillor McKinnon, second by Councillor Epp. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Presentations. We don't have any presentations. Public participation. Do we have anybody who wishes to speak?
So Kathy Salute, 900 Neff Road. So Mayor and Council members, I'm reading this on behalf of my husband Selby and I would like to comment about the issue that has arisen with regard to the buffer lands between the Centre Mountain developments and the Metchosin residents living predominantly along Neald and Happy Valley roads. These buffer lands, comprising 112 acres, were an essential component of the 2017 Reconciliation Agreement and were clearly designated as a natural buffer to protect nearby residents from impacts associated with industrial activity and high-density residential housing. This reconciliation agreement was often touted by its proponents as a unique and history-making collaboration between three separate jurisdictions, a win-win-win opportunity, they said. However, once the ink had dried on the document and the 300-acre transfer of land to Langford had been accomplished, things really started to change. Ownership and responsibilities were shifted around, numbered companies established, and plans were created to turn a beautiful mountainside into a desert of urban industrial sprawl. Thousands of trees were cut down and topsoil was removed so that the memory of a beautiful forest ecosystem would be easy to forget. Hillsides were reduced to piles of rocks with little obvious forethought given to the effects of erosion on surface drainage or contamination of groundwater in Aquifer 606, which are also shared by many Metchosin domestic well users. Once the ground was prepared, the Langford developer, who uses several company names and disguises, asked the City of Langford for variance to drill wells and use septic systems in the 200-acre industrial business park. This was a direct contravention of the Reconciliation Agreement, as it stated explicitly that the industrial business park would tie into municipal water and other services. If it had not been for the action of a few Metchosin residents and some committed friends in Souk and Langford, who raised public awareness and pressure to defeat this variance application, nothing would have happened. Metchosin's mayor and CEO certainly did nothing to advocate for Metchosin residents' right for protection of the shared groundwater resource. Next, the developer demanded that they should be compensated by allowing the resizing of residential building lots from half-acre to quarter-acre. A doubling of the number of building lots and a doubling of the number of families, the volume of traffic, and of recreational demands. No pushback from our mayor or CAO. They obviously thought it was okay to double the impacts on neighboring Metchosin residents. And then the developer believes that they have a right to use the buffer lands as their own dedicated park space to fulfill their subdivision obligations to the City of Langford. And our mayor and CAO agree. They even go as far as contacting the CRD to facilitate such a transaction and offer it for sale at a very reasonable bargain basement price. So what the heck is going on here? Not only have the mayor and the CAO acted unilaterally and independently without council authorization, they have shamefully waited for the citizens of Metchosin to stand up and defend what is rightfully theirs. They have not represented the residents of Metchosin and seemingly have been very eager to placate the developer's every wish without due consideration for any negative impacts to our community. So, what to do with the buffer lands? They should be preserved as a natural landscape that has its own intrinsic value. As much as possible, these 112 acres should be left intact to protect its unique biodiversity, the surface and groundwater relationships, and the precious connections to all life. This is what was promised in the Reconciliation Agreement, and that's what Metchosin residents actually voted for. So leave it alone and let it be.
Kathy, could I ask you to forward that correspondence to the staff for their recording? Thank you.
Stephen Sawyer, 1498 Neald Road. This was the issue that that brought me here to the council tonight. Was when I filled out my survey. I returned it promptly, and I'd just like to address some of the questions. When we bought at the top of Neald Road, we were the end of the Neald Road in 1998. Since moving to this rural community, we've had Russ Crawford punch through an extra kilometer of road, and we've had constant development and constant trucks and all the heavy equipment, etc., that is associated with all of that kind of stuff. The land swap agreement, we supported that in principle because of the value to Metchosin that the land swap gave to us. One of the things that we would like to see with these buffer zones is to keep it as green space. We do not want to see a park. We don't want to see groomed trails. We don't want to see the things that parks have. They have parking lots, they have washrooms, they have groomed trails, they have maintenance, they have all this kind of stuff. We're not interested in that. We would like to see that natural intrinsic green space, as was just mentioned. One of the things that people may not be aware, ever since Langford approved that development on that zone, there has been at least one black bear that's been displaced. And I think everybody in our neighborhood has seen that bear way more often than we've seen bears in the past. And looking through social media, I see that a lot of people are reporting bear sightings at a much greater rate than we ever have before. And I suspect that most of that is a result of all of the Langford construction, etc. So wildlife are being impacted. We're seeing a lot more deer than we have in the past moving around our neighborhood. And one of the things that we've been putting up with is the noise. We're right up at the top. It acts like a megaphone, if you will. So everything that happens on Dudney Flats, the blasting, the heavy equipment comes up. I will qualify that by saying that by the time it gets to us, it's not as noisy as it would be if you're standing right next to it. But the constant noise kind of detracts from I'm going to use that word again, ruralness. But it's just a concern that we have, and for this buffer zone land, our preference is to keep it as green space. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Mr. Cole.
Tom Cole, 3960 Hibbert Lane. Proposal, leave it the way it is. Leave the trees there. Leave it there. There's a family of cougars that live in there. I don't know whether you people have walked in there or not, but I have. Anyway, when it comes to the black bear comes to visit my home every spring. Walks through trying to dig up a few stumps on my 5 acres and carries on up the mountain. Anyway, I would like to make a suggestion. This map that came with this letter is terrible. I want to see my address. I want to see my streets on here. I want to see something that I can actually read and put my finger on. This, yes, it shows a green space, but in what perspective is this to Neald Road and Hibbert Lane? It doesn't show that. And yes, and there's another little map on the back, but it doesn't do it. You have to try and create a map on an 8.5 by 11 that puts streets in some kind of context that we can look at. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a copy for you. It's very short. Good evening, it's Bonnie Boober, 1135 Neald Road. Mayor, Councillor, and Chief Administrative Officer. Further to my email letter that you received on Wednesday, August the 17th, I would like to add...
Just Bonnie, I'm hearing some noise. It's not my hearing aids.
He stepped outside.
Oh, great. Sorry, Bonnie.
That's okay. Should I bend it down? Thanks. Further to my email that you received on Wednesday, August the 17th, I would like to add the following comments. Once again, I would like to remind you of the 2017 land swap referendum. The 4-page pamphlet that was sent out to Metchosin residents included the actual referendum question that in part states Metchosin receives a 112-acre green space buffer, and under the questions and answers section states 112 acres of green space to buffer residents from Langford. Also in that document, Councillor McKinnon's reason for voting yes was, and I quote, "We preserve our rural character, protect environmentally sensitive lands, and buffer ourselves from Langford's urban land uses, and there is no financial risk or loss of tax base for the community. We've worked together to mitigate our risks." Finally, in summary, this survey that was sent out is and should be a very important document to the adjoining residents only. The others had their say when 76% of Metchosinites cast their ballot on the referendum. They spoke and you heard them. End of story. Thank you, and I'll be sending in my survey.
Thank you. Do you have anybody else that would like to speak at public participation for the Parks meeting? You state your name and address,
Certainly.
please.
Leonore Davidson, 900 Speyside Lane, in Metchosin, even though it's a soup postal. I understand you've sent out a survey to all the residents of Metchosin. Is that what these people are talking about? Is that correct, about the buffer?
There was a survey that was sent out. It was dated April. It was sent out within the last 2 weeks, I believe.
I live in Metchosin, and so do all my neighbors.
So this was...
And we have never received anything.
This was back in April, an email. This public consultation process was started back in February. I had proposed a public engagement process. The CAO had sent out emails to all of Mayor and Council regarding where we'd be like the survey of future the future of the buffer lands to go. I responded with that I wanted to see the survey and some questions, comments, information sent out to all of the neighbors along Billston Creek, to Dallimore and the area behind, up Mill Road and along Happy Valley. So we wanted to have a concentration of those people that are most affected by the land swap. And that's why, if I don't know where you live, I didn't hear your address, but
live
that's
in the last property in Metchosin.
right. And so that's why you wouldn't have received this survey. So it's
that whole thing about the buffer and everything else, as the mayor knows, there was a plan B. There was a plan A that we all voted on, and a lot of us voted yes. Some of us, like myself, voted no. And then afterwards, after you all voted, we found out there was a plan B, which you signed off the Yates's property and the Davidson property in plan B. So we have been affected more than probably everyone else here, because we are one of the largest landowners in Metchosin. Fee simple, we pay full taxes, and so does Yates. They are the other large owners, so we have been affected more than even the people in Neil. So we feel that we should have had something to say about this, because you've all, messed up our fee simple property now, and we have owned it 76 years. So we feel we have some rights in this municipality. My husband has lived here 76 years, and we have had no benefit from it. Now we are sitting in fee simple property and full taxes and never get any information or anything. And now Plan B is part of that Plan A. So we are entitled to have as much sent out to the people around there as everywhere else.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Jay Shukin, 5340 Lebon Road, and again, speaking as APRM Prez. I understand that the survey letters went out to the Neil Road residents and area, unfortunately with the wrong date. I have to say, as a start to the public engagement process, and I believe that that is a good and just and fair thing to do, in terms of starting with the residents who are immediately impacted. What was interesting in the letter is there seemed to be an indication of more work that would be done in terms of hearing public input. And so I would assume that the broader community will get a chance to speak at that point. But again, I think it is important that those local residents, those who are impacted by the development and the cutting and the blasting that has happened to date, are heard first. To Stephen's point and to Tom's point, I am sympathetic with the idea of leaving it alone. Unfortunately, there are 280 homes being built adjacent to the buffer land. And so something has to change. There has to be a deeper plan in terms of protecting the buffer land and protecting area residents. So that needs to be part of the broader conversation. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Nicole Shukin, Le Bon Road resident. I was going to speak to this at the council meeting, but it's park related, it's buffer land related. So I just want to speak again. I've spoken about this before, but to the startling admissions by Mayor Rands and the CAO that our district was privately negotiating the sale of Metchosin's buffer land in 2021 for a mere $274,000 in order to help fund a possible Indigenous protected area for Mary Hill. So in a statement posted by the CAO this past July on the district's website, she admits that the sale of the buffer was being explored, quote, as part of a potential contribution to a future Mary Hill IPA outcome. Now, exploring a potential IPA for Mary Hill is a worthy initiative. But selling the buffer land for only 20% of its book value to ostensibly fund this project, and trying to do so more than a year before a district signed a standstill agreement involving exploration of funding concepts for Mary Hill, this raises many serious questions. And one question is this: why would a tangible community asset be sold for peanuts to fund a speculative project? The IPA for Mary Hill may work out, but it may not. Based on our district's sales agreement with the CRD, which can be found on the Friends of the Metchosin Bufferland website, the sale of the buffer wasn't being made conditional on any actual realization of an IPA for Mary Hill. Our district was poised to sell the buffer land without any guarantee of a potential IPA achieving success. And remember, the buffer is the only land that Metchosin has received to date from the 2017 land swap. I wonder if this situation sounds familiar to people, and I think it does, because I'm hearing other voices in the room. Do others hear echoes of the historic land swap brokered in 2017 and formalized in the reconciliation agreement? Mayor Rands, Councillor McKinnon, and Councillor Kahakawila, in 2017, you encouraged Metchosin residents to give up something tangible, a whopping 350 acres of land to Langford, in exchange for Crown lands that may or may not ever come to us, depending on the results of Chianu's treaty process. So with Mary Hill emerging as a priority with the standstill agreement, is Council carefully considering possible repercussions for Metchosin and its interests in fulfilling the terms of the land swap? As you know, under the terms of the reconciliation agreement, Metchosin is to receive sections 95, 28, and 25 when the treaty process is completed, but only if those are the settlement lands that Chianu receives in the end. And there are a lot of ifs in the reconciliation agreement. So for instance, the agreement reads in paragraph A of the recitals, quote, Beecher Bay would have ownership of and jurisdiction over the treaty parcels if they become treaty settlement lands. Section 6 of the agreement states, if the treaty parcels or any of them are transferred to Beecher Bay will then transfer the treaty parcel to Metchosin. So given all these ifs, there's no certainty that the land included in the reconciliation agreement will end up coming to Metchosin. So I think a fair question to ask right now is, how will the focus on Mary Hill impact consideration of not just the buffer lands, but sections 95, 28, and 25 at the treaty negotiation table. Is our district and council's support of the standstill agreement aligned with its duty to advocate for Metchosin's interests in realizing the outcomes of the historic reconciliation agreement? I respect Chianu's interest in Mary Hill and its efforts to secure the best possible outcomes for its community. Metchosin also has a stake in understanding which treaty settlement lands are emerging as a priority for Chianu, since the outcomes of the land swap for Metchosin hang in the balance. I'll finish up here. So I just wanted to compare Metchosin's long wait to realize benefits from the land swap with the huge benefits quickly realized by Langford. And others have talked about the development of Centre Mountain Business Park and the 280 home residential subdivision that are well underway on the 350 acres given up by Metchosin. Mayor Rands, you and the CAO worked to broker the great land swap and reconciliation agreement 5 years ago. And before you step down as mayor and the CAO resigns, can you reassure residents that we're not going to discover after you've left that the reconciliation agreement isn't so historic or so great for Metchosin?
Okay, thank you. Nicole, can you send those to staff, please? Thank you. Do we have anybody else for public participation? Okay, not seeing anybody. We'll move along in the agenda to page 3, the adoption of the minutes from the Parks meeting of July 18th.
I'll move adoption.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor McKinnon, seconded by one of you, Councillor Kahakawila. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to Councillor's report number 7. That's your pink item here. Okay. This is my councillor's report for the 22nd of August, so the Metchosin Museum Society. So I attended the Metchosin Museum Society meeting last Thursday night. We discussed the motion that was on the table at our last meeting, providing a plaque to recognize the past, present, and future volunteers of the Metchosin Museum Society. There was substantial and measurable conversation, and it was really wonderful to hear them speak to all of the renovations, the rejuvenations, and the formation of the native teaching garden, the Pioneer Museum, and then one-room schoolhouse. I also proactively spoke about the need for collaboration within the groups that use municipal space. And just a reminder to all of council that you're invited to the 150th year celebration of the original 1872 Metchosin Schoolhouse. That's on September 24th. The second item I wanted to bring up because in September, at our September 19th meeting, we'll have recommendations, the first, second, and third reading per the CAO's directive regarding the Dogs in Metchosin working group and their work towards amending our bylaw. So just to give you an update regarding that, before we, it's going to, I hope, have a substantial conversation regarding the bylaw next time. So this goes actually back to February of 2020. The District of Metchosin Parks meeting, there was substantial conversation and discussion regarding dogs and their conflicts with wildlife and livestock at Seabluff Place, or Seabluff Farm rather. It was decided that we would have an educational campaign as well as increased bylaw enforcement to enforce our bylaws regarding dogs. I did write an article for the Metchosin Muse for the 2020 edition titled Dogs and Sheep Don't Mix. It was thought that bylaw 421 was not as clear as it could be to reduce conflicts between humans, dogs, and farm animals and wildlife. And after numerous 2020 incidents of dogs chasing and injuring farm animals in our community. A group of very dedicated Metchosin residents volunteered to take up the task of redefining some of the points in the bylaw 421. The Dogs in Metchosin Working Group was established as an official working group of this council. They had their own terms of reference. Appointed to the group was Monique Anastay, Shelley Donaldson, Dominique Gagnon-Moscow, Deborah Pyle, Charmaine Traverso, Lisa Vogt, Patty Weishaus as the chair, and myself as the council liaison. And I've got links to all of this in my council report. The Dogs in Metchosin Working Group met almost monthly from February 21st, 2021 to review Bylaw 421 and to provide definitions and to identify potential conflict zones and signage. At the June 30th, 2021 Dogs in Metchosin Working Group meeting, a final review of the Animal Control Bylaw was completed. There was a review of the recommendations. A very comprehensive and well-received report was presented to Council on January 17, 2022. Conflicts with dog off-leash have continued into 2022. A contracted employee is currently drafting the Animal Control Bylaw with amendments provided by the Dogs in Metchosin Working Group and comments from this committee, and that will come forward at the September 19th meeting. I also wanted to include dates in this just so everybody was aware how long it does take to consider amending a bylaw, like Bylaw 421 or 259, as we spoke about earlier this evening. And so I have no request, just to receive this for information. And then thirdly, just a reminder that the Metchosin Farmers Market continues every week. We have musicians there now. It's a wonderful experience. We have more and more people coming as far as New Brunswick to come to our farmers market. And I would encourage everybody to come and support our volunteers and our farmers. And with that, I close the councillors' report. Correspondence, none. Bylaws, none. I'll take a movement to adjourn the meeting. Moved by Councillor McKinnon, seconded by Councillor Kahakawila. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. That adjourned. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the Public Works meeting. Are there any additions? If there are no additions to the agenda, could I have approval, please?
Second.
Moved by Mayor Rand, seconded by Councillor Kahakawila. All in favor? Are there any presentations for Public Works?
Jennifer Burgess, 3837 Duke Road. It's not so much a presentation as a appreciation for your works, people. The crew, as well as some CRD individuals who can identify black knapweed, successfully were working along Duke Road, and all of Tower Point has also been fenced, and black knapweed has been sprayed. This is maybe a parks issue, but I just wanted to thank the crew that were there doing it. And it brings, of course, memories of my good friend Ken Farquharson, who would go, yay. Thanks. Okay.
Thanks, Jennifer. Ken is always on the patrol for knapweed, and we do have a great crew out there. Is that it for public participation? Okay. I'm moving on to the minutes. I do have a clarification for the meeting of July 18th, and that is section 5, where it was, and it was my fault because it was a verbal update. So it was under the ICBC grants. We did get $6,000 toward 2 new radar speed readers. But the other, there was also $7,500 not $7,000 toward the 40-kilometer flashing signs around the village. So, can I move? Have a motion for adoption of the minutes as amended? Moved by Moran, seconded by Councillor McKinnon. All in favor? Thanks. So we have the annual report, excuse me, from the Metchosin Arts and Cultural Centre Association, and they are having their another event. They had a great event on July 1st, their Festivus, and now there's another family fun day. There's a poster for those got it, which is a maker's market, which is really looks like a lot of fun on September the 3rd of the long weekend. So there's craft and food vendors and kids activities, a puppy meet and greet from the Humane Society, and so on. So I do have this further my report, but I would ask that council could support and endorse the September 3rd event. Do we need a motion for that?
That would be great, actually, if you guys want to do that maybe in the council's report. I think at this point, receive the MAPIS report and then a motion to endorse the Maker's Market on the school property.
Okay. So move receipt of the reports.
Move receipt.
Second. Moved by Councillor Cockawilla, seconded by Councillor Little. And so moving on to the councillor's update then. Could we have a motion to support the MACA event on the grounds?
Yeah, I'll move that.
September 3rd.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Little, seconded by Councillor Cockawilla. All in favor? Thank you. Right. Let's get organized here. So we'll start the councillor's report with a brief verbal report from the fire chief. The fire chief over the 3 weeks, fairly recently, was up at the base camp, the fire base camp in Oliver, working on the Caramis Creek fire, doing the staging, looking after where all the firefighters were going and all their needs. We also had a fire truck up there. A new engine was there. The fire truck was up there, and 4 firefighters from here also went up to fight the fires up there and install sprinkler systems and be ready to defend houses that might have come under threat. There's a new engine arriving at the fire department in October. A new self-contained breathing apparatus are arriving in September. As far as the Fire Smart program, they'll be ending the 2-year funding agreement will end at the end of the year. We're hoping to get, as you know, our fire chief is always after the grants and hopes to continue that. So far, we've had residents in Metchosin have had $22,000 in rebates through the Fire Smart program, so it's pretty amazing. And lastly, for the fire department, there's a recruiting information session on Wednesday. Otherwise, I won't go over it as our meeting is dragging on, but I did want to mention the RCMP in that we've had a couple of complaints about speeding and scary events, such as Vio Mitcho getting almost run off the road on her horse by a motorcycle. Anyway, I did contact the RCMP office, and immediately I was put in touch with Constable Benj Bartley for the traffic services. And he was great, and I explained to him about the traffic, and he was very receptive to hearing about, you know, points of problems, and they are planning on upping their presence on William Head. And they also suggested that if there are any complaints about traffic, is to phone the non-emergency line, because once it's official on the non-emergency line, then those calls are dispatched to a member to look into. So that's really the best way to complain for that. I think that is all I had.
Did you want to mention the mural?
Pardon?
The mural.
Oh yes, I was going to mention the mural. Thank you. I don't know if you've all seen it, but there is a brilliant mural painted by Art Brendan at the entrance to the MACA part of the school building. It's really quite spectacular. So hopefully, if you haven't seen it yet, you'll drop by on September 3rd to the event there, which is from 11 to 2, and have a look around. So that being all, could I please have a motion to adjourn? What?
What did I miss? There's always something, right? I always get... Oh, right, Bev. Sorry, Bev. And I did... So Bev sent a correspondence about traffic problems at Kangaroo and Sioux Road, specifically crashes. And there have been a lot. It's a provincial highway, so any lights or any action there would be the province's responsibility. As far as Metchosin goes, you wanted in your letter about the 15 crashes that took place from 2017 to 21 and where that was, and that was Happy Valley and Hillman. So it was that Rocky Point, Happy Valley intersection was the 15. The next one was 11 crashes at Happy Valley and Lindholm. So Happy Valley is a bit of a hotspot for crashes. So, all right, now I am done.
Move adjournment.
Second adjourn.
All right, moved by Councillor Cockawilla, seconded by Councillor Little. All in favor? I'm not that done. I know. I'm going to get pushed out. Okay, all in favor? Thank you. We are adjourned.
Okay, call to order the council meeting. We have pinks for the council meeting, I believe. Yeah, we have one pink. Could I motion to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Kahakawila, second by Councillor McKinnon. Discussion. Those in favor, opposed, carried. Public participation to the council meeting.
Jay Shukin, 5340 Bond Road, and also speaking as APRM president, and maybe this is my last comment in that role. Councillor Epp, I should have mentioned something. Again, the flashing speed signs both through the village and near the stables.
The crosswalk.
The crosswalk, yeah. I think they're brilliant. I obey them all the time, so excellent work there.
Thank you.
The question I had is when we might see the bylaw enforcement policy. This was reviewed a number of weeks ago. There seemed to be consensus among council about the changes. And one thing I have to do is I have to applaud council for taking the comments that the APRM had, such as you were able to, and Bev Bacon as well. I think there was a very important additions that we made, especially if you look back to the very first meeting and the policy that was brought forward. I think it's changed tremendously. One of the big changes is the fact that there will be an explicit statement about bylaw enforcement, and especially a consideration of past issues that may have happened in terms of bylaw issues and in terms of what the enforcement action could be. And specifically, I'm going to raise 3659 Sioux Road, which has been the scene of numerous bylaw issues. Bylaw violations for sure, but numerous bylaw complaints. And there has been another bylaw issue, as I'm aware of, at this property. So council, with the passing of that policy, will have a good tool to make an enforcement action against this property owner where there have been numerous complaints and numerous issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jay. Kira?
Thank you, Jay. The bylaw enforcement policy will be coming forward to the next council meeting in September.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's very interesting sitting here listening to everybody talk at all the different meetings. And one of the things that comes out for me, the outstanding thing, is the ability to actually participate at public participation. When people talk about the community that we live in, regardless of who you are, but that you actually live here, there are so many wonderful things about this community. And some of the highlights for me has been volunteering. Speaking of the lights, when Councillor Epp contacted me, I think it was a year ago in the spring, could we sit down and talk about these crossings, where the trails are and where the roads are. Now, a year later, we see that we have these flashing lights. Yes, it might be urban, and I've watched people go across there, and I've heard people say, crosswalks are a false sense of security. That depends on the people using them. If they don't look before they cross, that's a problem. If they don't push the light button, that's a problem. And I've seen all sorts of users at this particular crossing, but it is working. And I thank you for that. And I thank you for the support of council. But mostly I want to say, I thank the residents that actually came out the day that they did in my particular neighborhood, probably a half a dozen of them, I can't remember the numbers, and counted all the cyclists and the cars that went by, and the walkers, dog walkers, people with strollers, people with bicycles, and kids in trailers, which nearly got wiped out, and horseback riders. 3 lanes there with a left turn in between 2 sections of S-turns on that road, and speed has been really difficult. I just really hope that this is a source of traffic calming. But again, what I wanted to commend was the efforts that went into getting this taken care of, and having my neighbors come out was amazing. We see volunteers, the garage sale, the museum, people are there every week, several days every week, probably 5 days a week, doing the things that they do inside to revitalize it and preserve some history in our community. So for those residents who want a sense of community, there's a lot of volunteering needed in our community for all ages of people. So please, everybody, step up if you can do that. It makes a big difference to belong to a place like Metchosin. Stepping outside of that, I did want to make a little bit of an announcement. There is the BC 55 Plus Games in Victoria this year, and I will be participating because I qualify by age and I can ride a horse. This is the first year that working equitation, which is a sport that's only been in Canada since 2017, will be eligible to present itself at Saanich Fairgrounds, which is where all the equestrian sports will be. There are 4 members of our club that will be participating, and 6 of us actually went up to a schooling show in Glenora this weekend, and we brought home 6 ribbons. So that was really exciting for us. So if you can make it out to the BC Games, please do come out and support us. There's cycling going on through this community as well, I understand. So it's all over Victoria. And it's great that it's actually in Victoria this time. Next time it'll be in Abbotsford. I don't know what sports they'll be presenting, but it's pretty neat to have some of our own people going out to that. So just wanted to make that be known to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shelley. Anyone else?
Hi, Bev Bacon, Metchosin resident, and I think I'm in the right meeting now. And one of my letters made it into a pink, but the other one that's hot off the press didn't. And this is addressing Mayor Rance directly, because you hold the key, because you represent us with CRD Parks. And I'm posing this as a question, and maybe you can inform me. I just learned today that CRD Parks is asking for the ability to borrow money to acquire land. And a little bit more checking, I found that every other board member of CRD approved that, except for John Rance. Did I get that right?
I don't. I'm not sure about that one, Bev. Actually, at the committee level, it was very close. I can't remember what the vote was.
Someone reported that you were the only holdout, so I wanted to convince you of why it would be good for
I will
them
be
to borrow
speaking
money.
to that when it comes on the agenda, like, further down on the agenda. I think it's the last item on the agenda.
You're going to talk about that?
So I will talk about why I am convinced it's a terrible idea.
Okay. Well, if I can have my turn first. Listen up, everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, so you wouldn't expect CRD to wait till they had all the cash before they'd buy a building, right? It'd be acceptable for them to mortgage a building that they're going to buy, and that's how land is acquired now. If we, who are property owners now, waited until we had all the cash to pay cash for our property, we'd still be renting. The way it goes is land is going up faster than the mortgage rates. and borrowing money is what you do to acquire land. So I'm in full support of CRD being able to borrow money when a prize patch of forest comes up that we just have to save. And I would like you, I remember at a CRD meeting that I attended that Mayor John Rans voted for something that he qualified as saying, I'm voting this way because this is how my council wants me to vote and this is how the residents want me to vote. It's not what I think. So I'm hoping, if it's not too late, to give the authority to CRD Parks to borrow money to acquire land, that you will represent the community and the municipality and not just your own views. So maybe you'll consult with the other council members on why it's a good idea and put it out to the public. Is it a good idea? I would also like to see the levy on our property tax go higher. Land costs a lot of money on southern Vancouver Island, and it's not going to get any cheaper, and they're not making any more of it. And we have to save these patches of forest before they're all gone. We have to save them for the climate, for the air we breathe, for the wildlife. And I could go on. We'll listen to your reasons, but if you survey the people, I think we want more land saved, and it seems to fall to us to do that, especially when it's disappeared everywhere else. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Anyone else?
I just wanted to thank you guys for doing the job you do, because you don't seem to get enough recognition for how hard it is. And so thank you. And thank you everyone who shows up to council. It's the people who put in their opinions and show up who kind of create the community, and I really appreciate everyone being here. Thank you.
So thank you for showing up, and we've appreciated your presence in the last few meetings. It's good. Good to see other younger people, well, younger compared to me at least, coming out. Okay, is there anyone else in public participation? If not, I will move on to the meeting then, and that will be adoption of the minutes. We can take all three.
I'll move receipt. Or, sorry, move adoption.
Seconded by Councillor Kahakawala. Discussion. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Now we have the receipt of the minutes, the Finance and Environment.
I'll move receipt.
Moved by Councillor McKinnon, seconded by Councillor Little. Discussion. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Move receipt of planning.
Moved by Councillor Kahakawala, seconded by Councillor McKinnon. Discussion. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Public Works.
Move receipt.
Seconded by Councillor Kahakawala. Discussion. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And now we have Parks.
Move receipt of the committee meeting July 18th.
Seconded by Councillor Epp. Discussion. Those in favor and opposed? Carried. Now, Mayor's report. We have a Verizon report which had been agreed to be handed to me. Okay. So this is a Verizon report from our in-camera meeting preceding this meeting. The first is the appointment of a youth volunteer to water new plantings at Blaney Park. The second is council approval or council to appoint Sue Lynn Taranowski as our interim CAO, corporate officer, and approving officer. So welcome, Sue Lynn. It's very nice to have you on board, and don't anybody out there scare her away. So the third one is the appointment of Tina Hansen, sitting over there at the table, as deputy corporate officer and interim head of freedom of information. And finally, and I hope that this will address a lot of the concerns and questions that have been expressed not only in this meeting but many of the other meetings, and that is the release of the minutes of the supplementary, what's the name of that, the supplementary package. In essence, the reference I made two meetings ago to the minutes, the in-camera minutes as they pertained to the green space and the disposition of the green space. In order to have as much transparency as we can, Council has determined to release those minutes in their entirety as they pertain to those issues. So they will be put on the council agenda, not the council agenda, they will be, sorry, I'm sorry, a little distracted. They will be put on the municipal website probably around Thursday. There will be some redactions on it just to ensure the confidentiality is where they have to be. But it will be the minutes of all of the meetings that I mentioned in the mayor's report a couple of times ago. And I encourage everyone to look at them and to read them thoroughly. You will see that much of what has been said over the past several months is incorrect, that council has been fully consulted on all of the issues with regards to the disposition, and this has not been any kind of secret negotiations between the CIO or myself. This has been council directed through its entirety. So read them and please end that narrative. I have also expressed concerns about the frustrations that I've had in being able to discuss the context of why we undertook that direction. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about that because we have received a green light to be able to discuss a little bit more thoroughly the context and as how it pertains to the Mary Hill outcomes. So I'm going to begin by saying that Metchosin has benefited considerably from having visionary people both on staff and in the community. There's been a number of marvelous innovations we've been able to undertake because of visionary people. And I'm going to say right now, I'm going to point out, I don't know if she's still here or not, one of the most visionary people is the fire chief. It has been remarkable working with her in being able to do blue sky planning and everything else. Another remarkable person to be able to work with has been our CIO. Also somebody very visionary, but also with the ability to help put those visions into a workable form. But in order to realize visions, we have to be able to discuss everything. We have to be able to look at all options. We have to be able to start with an idea. And this is how these things work in this community and in other areas. You start with an idea. Hey, you know, maybe this could happen. Maybe this would be good. And then you start blue sky conversations. And here's where people like our CIO and the chief have really been influential, is that you can blue sky everything. And when you do that, you get sometimes multiple visions. So then when you can see something that you really think will work, then it gets refined by staff. Staff looks at it. How can we actually put those visions into action? You oftentimes have to take on additional partners. So you have to have agreements. You have to understand, and each one of these partners, and this is what happened with the land swap, is that they all have to go through these processes. You have to work through the agreements. you have to look at, can this work? Can that work? All of that kind of stuff. And once you are certain that that vision can be reality, then you bring it to staff. Not to staff, I should say. You bring it before the public. But you can't bring anything before the public unless you actually know that it's going to work. So that's why you go through all of these processes. And when you're really sure that, okay, this makes sense, it can work, then you bring it to the public, and then the public can provide their inputs. Then, when you've gone through that, you go through council approval and ultimately public approval, as happened with the land swap through the referendum. And just incidentally, why we're mentioning that, the referendum, is that there was another side of this coin which really directed us to those outcomes, and that is that even though 95, 28, and 25 have not yet come to Metchosin, all assurances have been built in to assure that they will. But what that did is it froze those properties, which have prevented them from being quarried and from being sited with density housing. And if you don't believe that that would have happened, just talk to Chief Chips. He has said he would gladly tell you what he would have done with that land if we had not have done this. So I think everybody needs to understand that. So anyways, that's the process that we went through the land swap, and that's the process we were going through with Mary Hill. Mary Hill has been a consideration. The preservation of Mary Hill has been a consideration and a goal of every council since incorporation. And for people long before that, Mary Hill is a jewel. The possibility of, and it's been something that all of our previous councils have talked about, but the military still had it, and there was never really an impetus to do anything about it. But when the military declared it surplus, it meant that Mary Hill was on the block. The opportunity came along thanks to changing legislation that enabled us to be able to find a way of preserving it through an indigenous protected area. And you all have seen the standstill agreement and everything else. So, how do we do that? Here's an opportunity, a one-time opportunity to preserve one of the most important ecological, environmental properties anywhere on this island, probably in British Columbia, and also have something that partnerships with First Nations, partnerships with other agencies that are unprecedented. And it's actually probably even more historic, if you would like, than the land swap. So how do you do that? You do the process that I was talking about. You start blue skying. What's the vision? The vision is to protect Mary Hill. The vision is to have it an indigenous protected area. The vision is to have Chiano First Nation have full title of that land and not have to develop it, which they have a full plan to do. This concept and this vision was discussed with this council right from the beginning of the term, starting with Councillor McKinnon and I briefing this council on December 10th, 2018, and going on from there. We're unable at this time to release that particular set of minutes until we have further consultations with our partners. But the fact is that we have been pursuing this as an option for Mary Hill, how do we generate revenues? What options are available to us in order to enact our portion of influence with regards to making it an Indigenous protected area? And one of those options has been generating the necessary revenues to offset the purchase cost and the additional ongoing revenues to Beecher Bay. One of those options, and we have pursued other options are being pursued right now, but one of them was the sale of CRD, of the green space to the CRD to generate the necessary revenues. And we're not talking about the $200,075 or lowball offer, because I've explained that probably, 20 times in this whole thing. The reason that was low is because it's park to park and it's valued differently. This council determined that that was not an appropriate option at the time and stopped it. The concept was presented to the CRD board by the Chiano First Nation several, 2 or 3 years ago at a public meeting. Further discussions as a result of that occurred at the board level and Parks Committee staff, and Parks Committee, regarding the possible means of achieving CRD support for the Mary Hill outcome, making it an Indigenous protected area. The CRD staff were authorized to visit the sites and determine the feasibilities. This is all part of the processes that you have to follow through before you go to the public to make sure all of this can actually work. The process was accelerated when the parks received an opportunity to expand the park through a time-sensitive purchase of a portion of a person's private property. So there was another property that was involved. CRD said, we've got an option to buy this property. Let's talk about the whole thing and at least put together some kind of an understanding so that we can take it to the public. Well, because of the lowball offer, the fact it was a standalone, we didn't believe that it would. There was a number of reasons. Council decided not to proceed with that. Is the option dead? As far as this council is concerned, yes. As far as future councils are concerned, they may choose to bring back that proposal, that concept, that option, when other options have been looked at and maybe not have proven to be a road forward to achieve the IPA. The next council may bring that forward as part of a larger package, perhaps, to ensure that there is that we can provide the necessary funding to achieve the IPA. That's going to be up to future councils, not this one. I know this has taken a while, but this is the process on how visions are realized. And this particular vision of the Mary Hill IPA could be world class, seriously world class. And it could also help to protect and preserve our own rural objectives. This is bigger than Metchosin, what we're talking about here. So I hope that helps explain the context of our decision.
No, it doesn't, John. It doesn't cut it at all. You've just told us everything that was exposed by us looking up through FOI. But what you're not dealing with is a goddamn buffer that was promised to the residents. So now you're saying Mary Hill is more important? So another land swap?
What I'm giving you
When
is,
do we trust you?
well, read the minutes. Read the minutes and you'll see who to trust.
John?
Yes, certainly. I mean, this is irregular. This is part of the council meeting, but go ahead.
I have somebody very involved with that whole negotiation, and they told me at very higher up, Mary Hill has nothing to do with the buffer area.
Well,
So who am I supposed to believe?
well, again, if we can get approval to release the minutes that of the previous 2 or 3 years, and beginning from December 10th, 2018, you will see that what you have been told is absolutely incorrect.
From you?
From me, what?
You've just told us everything we already know. What we're still waiting to hear is what are you going to do about the buffer?
Avril, I have explained that this council is doing nothing, that the sale to the CRD is a dead issue. The next council is going to be faced with how do we fulfill the necessary contributions for us in order to achieve the preservation of Mary Hill. Now, I would...
Preservation of the
Okay,
buffer.
listen, Avril, that's enough. I'm not getting into a debate. This is irregular. I've let you go too far on this already. So, anyways, that is the context, as I have said. That is what has led council unanimously to go through the process that we did to investigate whether the CRD purchase to enable the IPA was a feasible approach. And we had to go through all of that before we would come to council. When we were going to come to council, it would be then put to the public via referendum, and the public would get an ample opportunity to say yes or no based on the information that we could then provide. A future council, next council, is likely going to have to do that. Now, we would hope that there will be other options that will enable us to protect Mary Hill and see it see the vision completed, but it may not. But
Can I just ask why is Metchosin responsible for protecting Mary Hill? Why is it just us that has to come up with the money?
it's not.
Okay, so the minutes will explain all the other.
The minutes will explain if we are able to release the minutes. Now, there's going to be a release of the minutes over the past year that had to deal with the actual sale. And there is contextual statements in those minutes that will see that what I'm saying is accurate. As for the meetings that took place prior to that, beginning at the very beginning of this term, and actually before in the previous term, if we can release those, they will explain thoroughly the context and everything that has taken place and what has motivated this responsible council to pursue whatever options can be pursued in terms of achieving the IPA. And it isn't just this one option, but the sale, the whole purpose of exploring and going through this process was just to determine the feasibility of it. And the public would always have had the last say. So that's something that really needs to be understood. Anyway, I would encourage everybody who's sitting here and those who are not sitting here who just walked out, I would encourage you to get a hold of Sharon J. at Chiano First Nation and take a tour of the place.
Isn't that funny? That is the funniest thing you've ever said.
Well, I'm glad.
They are neighbors.
Yeah, that's right. And if anybody wants to see Mary Hill, you can take a tour, but it has to be established by Sharon J. And I know some of the mayors have, or at least were invited to take a tour of the place. Mary Hill is a jewel, like I said, and the potential of what could be achieved there is the most important thing this community could ever see done. So, again, if you get an opportunity, take a tour of the place, and a simple phone call to Sharon should be able to get you on a tour. That's the end of the report. Sorry to take so long, but I thought it was necessary. Look at the minutes that get released on Thursday, and I hope that we'll be able to get a release on all of the minutes at some point so you can see where the truth lies in all of this. We'll move on then to business arising. We have the Finance and Committee recommendation, the request for the RCMP policing, community policing. Councillor McKinnon.
I'll move that Council provide funding in the amount of $2,914 to the West Shore RCMP Community Policing Employee Program for 2022.
Second.
Second by Councillor Little. Discussion. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Public Works recommendations regarding the Village Square implementation.
I recommend that Council approve in principle the Metchosin Village Square implementation plan.
Seconded by Councillor McKinnon. Discussion. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Now we have the Parks Committee recommendation, signage from Weirs Beach to Taylor Beach.
Yes, I move that signage from Weir Beach to Taylor Beach along the foreshore that council approve. Number 1, sign for Weir Beach parking lot at the end of Sandgate Road. Number 2, sign on the eastern portion of Weir Beach on the rock face. Number 3, sign for Taylor Beach parking lot at the end of Taylor Road. Number 4, request to staff to send recommendation of signage to the CRD for placement at the end of the trail at Devonian Park. And B, that's it.
Seconded by Councillor McKinnon. Discussion. Those in favor? Opposed? I guess Councillor Hockerwill is in favor. Okay, that is, I am opposed. So then, make note of that. Now we have the Metchosin Museum Society request.
The Metchosin Museum Society requests to construct a portico on the Pioneer Museum building. That council approved the Metchosin Museum Society request to construct a portico on the Pioneer Museum building and refer the matter to staff for forwarding the request to the Agricultural Land Commission.
Seconded by Councillor Epp. Discussion. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Let's see. Staff report regarding the development variance permit, 4252 Metchosin Road.
Your rent.
Go ahead.
I move that we approve the application for the development variance permit for number 2204.
Councillor McKinnon.
I'll second it for discussion.
Go ahead.
Have we heard back from the notices sent out to the neighbors? I haven't seen any feedback on that. Apparently the notices were sent out, but I haven't heard any of the responses.
I can go actually profile and confirm if we've heard that, but to my knowledge, we haven't received anything back from the neighbors. Typically, it's the property owner that brings in
yeah, without that, I can't support this.
Sure. Okay, 5-minute recess while we get the pertinent information and maybe some of us can take a break.
Almost there. So I won't be joining you in Whistler.
Oh, no?
Yeah, I thought, well, if I was considering coming back to council, it would be a worthwhile investment of taxpayer dollars. Because I'm a big fan of the Leonora.
Yeah, I can understand that. I wouldn't if I wouldn't be either in your position.
Yeah. Anyway.
I
wish I was in Whistler, but I'll be up there for I was there this summer already for their BioBlitz, and we'll be back for their Fungus Festival in October.
So you're getting your Whistler trips in.
I get my Whistler time in there.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
But UBCM is fun, and I always consider it a useful investment.
Yeah. I hope so. It's a long time to be up there. Yeah. Was it? Yeah, I like to go at least once just to see, just to experience it. But it is a lot of money. Really? Really? Wow, that's a long time to go through. Oh, really? Oh, really? Went to the one at in Vancouver last time. It was live.
They had the walking truck circling.
Oh, really?
It was a lot of fun.
Well, when the one I was at, they had. Well, yeah, you were there too, and they were protesting outside the Chinese. Remember?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe you should go. Here. Do you know what brings it on? Do you know? Smell?
What's that?
Really?
11?
Wow.
Well, I don't
for
know,
heaven's
it's hard to
sakes.
say. There will be no questions. Question period answered. Okay, are we all ready? Please, can we get this meeting over with? Lisa, do you have the information here?
And there has been no receipt of the neighbor's my advice is that you postpone your decision, and we resend out letters, or you deny the application.
Can I? But we also send out notification to the owners, or to.
Yes,
we've already done that.
You're absolutely right, and there has been no public participation coming forward. However, you, in accordance with your policy, and I.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I would suggest that we do postpone this to the September.
Yeah.
Okay, make the motion.
I move that we postpone this to the September 19th meeting, and that we reissue letters to the residents within the 60-meter area.
Seconded by Councillor McKinnon. Discussion. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Schedule of the regular council and standing committee meetings.
There was an error made with the UBCM schedule back in December. With the UBCM meeting, it would be advisable to change the meeting from September 12th to September 19th due to 4 of the council members being in attendance at UBCM.
So I move that we change the schedule of regular council and standing committee meetings to make that notification that UBCM is indeed September 19th, not the 12th. Or sorry, it is the 12th, not the 19th, and the meeting will be September 19th.
Seconded by Councillor Kalakawilla. Discussion. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Reports for information. We can take all of them.
Move receipt.
Moved by Councillor Kahakawilla, seconded by Councillor McKinnon. Discussion. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Correspondence. Town of View Royal. Just their report.
Move receipt.
Moved by Councillor McKinnon, seconded by Councillor Little. Discussion. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Now we go to the final item of business. This is Bev's favorite. CRD. Municipal Consent Bylaw. Councillor McKinnon.
I'll move that council consent to the CRD adopting bylaw number 4506, the Regional Parks Loan Authorization Bylaw number 1, 2022.
I second that.
Second by everybody. Take your pick. Seconded by Councillor Epp. I think she was slightly ahead of that. A discernible difference there. So, okay. Councillor McKinnon.
I can't imagine a more important thing for CRD to invest public funds in and the protection of green spaces for future generations. I think the work that they've done through the acquisition of not only C2C Greenbelt and Sioux Hills Wilderness, but also the watershed catchment areas will be looked upon as visionary investments by future generations, and I'd like to see the work continue. If we don't do it in the next 5 years or so, it's going to become impossible, I suspect, both financially and just physically. So I think this is a really important resolution. I'd like to see Metchosin support it.
Anyone else? Councillor Epp and then Little.
I support it as well. I think it was $3 a household per year, and I think that's a pretty cheap contribution to help them get as much parkland as possible, which I believe is really important.
Councillor Little.
Yeah, I echo both my colleagues' concerns and comments, and this will be valuable for the CRD for the southern tip of Vancouver Island, and I would highly recommend that we approve this.
Councillor Kahakawilla.
We've recently asked CRD Parks to look at property in Metchosin, and one of the reasons why we did that was because they have the resources to be able to manage parks in a much better manner than most municipalities can. And I think to be able to provide them with the stability to create more regional parks, regardless of whether they're in Metchosin or not, is inconsequential. But they have the ability to do so, and to allow them to be able to do this borrowing loan gives them the leverage needed at the time that it's needed to be able to move forward with more acquisitions.
Okay, my turn. Bev. My turn, Bev.
You're outvoted, huh?
As I said at the CRD, I think this is a terrible idea. But you need to understand the context of this. I chaired the Parks Committee in the late 90s for several years. And during that time, we were faced with having to undertake a further borrowing, because our borrowing had been spent out for purchase of parks. And I sat there and looked at the graph that showed how much we were going to be paying it off, and we would be still paying off that borrowing. Well, I think it was 2020 when it finally ran out. It was the payback schedule was huge. We would have bought a bunch of parks, and then we would have spent the next year, several, 10, 15 years paying it off, which would have prevented us from buying anything else. So I sat and had a few sleepless nights as the chair, and then thought, well, why don't we come up with, why don't we do it differently? Why don't we do it as a acquisition fund? So instead of us paying interest, we pay instead into an acquisition fund that bears no end. I mean, then it's our money, and we won't be paying any interest on it at all. It wouldn't be borrowed. It would be continuous. I talked to Chris Costin, who was my vice chair at the time. We worked on the proposal, explained it to a committee of parks, an advisory committee, and explained it to the board ultimately. And it was accepted. And in fact, it was actually brought into completion when Karen was the mayor. Actually, it was in the following board. And as Councillor McKinnon has said, I mean, this is the most successful thing that we've ever done in terms of park acquisition, because we had that continuing income that was approved originally by a referendum of all the voters in this region. We had, initially it started at 10, and it went to $20 per household contribution into the acquisition fund. The acquisition fund, at the end of the acquisition fund, which was replaced by this proposal, we were generating something like $3.5 to close to $4 million a year from the acquisition fund. And the acquisition fund actually had, I don't know, I think it was $8 or $9 million in it, to be added to nearly $4 million a year on every subsequent year. So the idea was proposed then to borrow $50 million and get rid of the acquisition fund. So the $3 is not, I mean, the acquisition fund, the money that is being generated on the acquisition fund will be put into paying off the debt, but we are still going to be incurring debt. So instead of having a fund that was repeatable every year, and in the 1 year where we needed to spend more than we had in the fund, and that was with the purchase of Sandcut Beach and the Jordan River properties, we borrowed, in essence, we spent more than we were going to take in that year, and then just closed down for the next year the expenditures, and then it balanced back out again. Then we sold some of the property, and then the fund got built back up again. So it was a very workable thing. And the beauty of it is because we had the guaranteed ongoing money in the fund, we were able to partner with third-party Okay. Well, let's have the resolution now, so I don't have to. We resolve to go past 10. Come on, I only get to say this one more time, so.
I begrudgingly make the motion that we go past 10.
Seconded by?
Sure.
Andy, those in favor?
Should-
Good, okay. So we had third-party participation in many of those purchases. And we were able to leverage the acquisition fund far more than anybody anticipated. So as a result, we've added thousands of hectares of parkland to our parks, to regional parks. And a lot of that was because we were able to, because of the acquisition fund, we were able to leverage that with Habitat Acquisition Trust, with the old land TLC, places like that, with neighborhood groups, with municipalities. I mean, it went on and on. The leveraging that it enabled us to achieve all of that. This borrowing concept came up when the interest rates were in the basement. Now the interest rates are going up, they're rising. So it's going to get to the point that I was so horrified with as Parks Chair back in the 90s, where you're going to be looking at a huge debt load paid off. You're going to have a one-shot opportunity. The money's all going to be there. You'll go buy these properties, and then there's not going to be anything left, and there's going to be a burgeoning debt for years that will prevent us from acquiring more properties down the road. I am convinced that we will get less parkland under this proposal than we would under the continuing acquisition fund. That's why I was opposed to it then, and I'm opposed to it now. Councillor McKinnon.
I agree with you 100%. I was one of those third parties back when I was doing a lot of work with the Habitat Acquisition Trust. It's a much better funding model. And if I thought that we could go back, that CRD could go back to that model, I would support it in an instant. But it's not a question right now as to whether this represents a better system than the old funding system. It's a question of whether this represents a better system than nothing. And I think it does. I agree with you 100% on the premise that we had an exceptionally good funding mechanism in place, and CRD decided to discontinue it. But just because they did something stupid doesn't mean that we need to also.
If I can comment on that, is that I don't think that means we go back to nothing, because the acquisition fund has been diverted. I think that if we were to say, if municipalities were to reject this, we would just go back to the acquisition fund. That has been approved. It's not, we wouldn't go back to nothing. Anyways, Councillor Hockerwell.
But how likely is it that they would actually go back? Like, I mean, if we're at the point where we are now, and I agree with Councillor McKinnon, what are the chances of you being able to sway all of your counterparts of the CRD to not do this and to go back?
I don't know what would happen if an individual municipality turns it down. I know that there were other people who felt just as strongly as I did about. I mean, Jeff Young was one big example. He was every bit as passionate about retaining the acquisition fund and not borrowing as I was. So I don't know. I don't know what would happen if we said no. Councillor McKinnon.
According to this memo here, municipal consent is required from 2/3 of the participants. So one municipality saying no wouldn't change anything.
But 5 or 6 would.
Yeah. My preference would be to support this unless you feel there's a very, very real chance at the board that we can do something better.
I can't say that. Councillor Little.
Yeah, I urge you to adopt this as well. You talked earlier about visionaries,
visions and visionaries, and I think this is visionary for sure. Any kind of loan, as the cycles, the fiscal cycles go up and down. Certainly at the CRD, they have very talented people that could renegotiate mortgages and loans, and I have a lot of faith in that they would renegotiate it when it was available, just like we can if we have a mortgage at home. And I also must say, as the Parks Chair for the District of Metchosin, we've been inundated with people during the pandemic attending, as is their right, parks in Metchosin, CRD parks and parks in Metchosin. I think it's incumbent upon us, and it behooves us, to secure green space parks for future generations.
Councillor Rapp.
Well, I agree that interest rates, are going up, but also so are land prices. And we also, especially on Vancouver Island, there's a huge amount of pressure on landowners and large tracts of land to be developed. So I think that, I agree about the acquisition fund, but I do think that, the land is not going to be there forever, and I think that the increase in price of land tends to balance off the interest rates and paying interest a bit.
Anyone else? I would just comment that we have increased the acquisition fund as inflation has increased 2 or 3 times now, and that certainly would have been what we would have done in the future to offset the land prices. But anyways, I'm not going to belabor this any longer. I'll call the question if there's no further debate. Those in favor? Opposed? I'm opposed. Motion carries. And that ends the businose, and we're too late for the question period, so I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Kahakawala, seconded by Councillor McKinnon. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thanks for those that stuck this meeting out. It was a long night, and I appreciate you sticking around.